Midnight. Hello everyone, I am your storyteller, and you are now listening to Late Night Whispers. As the night falls, soft whispers emerge quietly amidst the falling rain. Here, we share forgotten stories, mysteries no one dares to mention, and silent calls from the other side. I know many of you come here seeking calm and rest in this video, but before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me. Now, relax, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself for a night unlike any other. Close your eyes, let your body relax. Let these whispers continue to find their way to you, every night. Late Night Whispers, where the night begins with a soft whisper. 019. The rental listing had been too good to be true. A colonial house in the heart of Cartagana's old quarter for half the price of comparable properties. I should have known better. But skepticism had always been my armor, my shield against the world's endless capacity for deception. People always talk about the dangers of trusting too easily. But what about the opposite? The dangers of never trusting anyone or anything at all. That was me. I'd laughed off the rumors, ghost stories, spiritual cleansings, the locals' whispered warnings about certain addresses, about a cursed house with a dark past. To me, all of it felt like elaborate theater designed to separate tourists from their money. But when I saw the listing, I felt something that I couldn't ignore. It was pulling me in. The house was a sprawling, decaying mansion, its faded paint almost blending with the thick fog that seemed to cling to its walls. A balcony overlooking the old quarter, the once grand staircase now covered in dust and old cobwebs, but still, it called to me. I laughed at my own hesitation. Was I really that superstitious? That cautious? I had always believed in facts, in logic. But something about that house, the way it stood, almost defiant, amongst the smaller, more humble buildings, sent a shiver down my spine. The real estate agent had been too eager. Too quick to dismiss the rumors and rush me into signing the contract. As if he knew something I didn't. It's a great price, he'd said. And the area's history? That's just people's imagination. Nothing more. I signed the lease without another thought. After all, I had always prided myself on my skepticism. No amount of superstitions would make me back down. 120. The first few nights were uneventful, but as the days wore on, the house began to feel different. It wasn't the creaking floors or the strange draft that would send cold air through the rooms at night. Those things could be explained away. No, it was something deeper, something that settled in my bones. I began to hear whispers. At first, it was easy to dismiss, just the wind, I told myself. But then the whispers started to grow louder. They seemed to come from the walls, from the very floors I walked upon. They weren't words I could make out at first, just low murmurs. But over time, I began to hear my name, faintly, whispered in the middle of the night. I dismissed it. Perhaps it was the house settling, or perhaps my mind playing tricks on me after days spent alone. But then came the dreams. 155. The dreams were always the same. I'd be walking through the house, but it was different, darker. The air heavy with something I couldn't quite grasp. As I moved from room to room, the house would shift, grow, stretch, and I'd hear the whispers again. They were no longer faint. They were louder, more urgent. And then, in the dream, I would come across a door. A door I had never seen before. It was made of heavy oak, its surface scarred with strange symbols I couldn't recognize. The whispers would grow to a crescendo, and the door would begin to creak open. Inside, there would be nothing but darkness. I could never bring myself to step inside, but every time I awoke, that door would remain burned into my mind. I couldn't escape the feeling that something had been waiting for me, something that wanted me to uncover its secret. 2:30. I ignored it. I tried to ignore it all. But soon, the house began to reveal its true nature. Strange occurrences became the norm. Lights flickered at odd hours. Shadows moved across the walls when there was no one around. It was as if the house was alive, watching. I became more and more isolated, not by choice but by a force I couldn't explain. It was as if something within the house didn't want me to leave, and the harder I tried to fight it, the more it pushed back. 3 o'clock. One night, after weeks of unrest, I finally decided to leave. I packed my bags, intent on escaping the growing sense of dread that seemed to have taken root in my soul. But when I went to the front door, I found it locked. Odd, I thought. I hadn't locked it when I entered. I tried the windows. They were sealed shut, the same strange symbols carved into the glass. It was as if the house had trapped me, preventing me from leaving, feeding off my fear. But then, in the dead of night, I saw it. 3:30. Through the window of the study, I saw the figure. It was tall, shrouded in shadow, but its glowing eyes pierced through the darkness. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel its gaze on me, deep and penetrating, as if it could see through my very soul. I turned away, my heart pounding in my chest, and rushed to the back of the house. But there, standing in the hallway, was the door. The door from my dreams. 4 o'clock. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real. The door was there, in front of me, just as I had seen it in my nightmares. The air around it seemed to hum with an unearthly energy. And then, I heard the whispers once again. They weren't the faint murmurs I had heard before. No. These whispers were louder, closer. They were calling me. Come closer, they beckoned. Open the door. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, as if it wasn't my own. The moment I touched the cold metal, a surge of energy shot through my body. I felt my consciousness fracture, as if something was reaching inside of me, something ancient, something powerful. And for the first time, I felt as though I were not alone in the room. 4:30. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. But as I pulled my hand away, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The whispers stopped. The air returned to normal, and for a moment, I thought I had escaped whatever had been pulling at me. But then, I saw it. 4:50. On the wall next to the door, a message had appeared. Written in a language I couldn't understand, it seemed to glow faintly in the dark. The characters seemed to shift before my eyes, as if they were alive, moving, watching me. And that was when I understood. The house wasn't haunted by ghosts. No. It was haunted by something far older, far darker, something that had been waiting for someone like me to come along. But it wasn't done with me yet. Not by a long shot. 047. The house sat on a narrow cobblestone street where the afternoon shadows stretched long and dark between buildings that had witnessed 4 centuries of human struggle. Its walls were thick limestone, weathered by time and soaked in the history of lives lived within its embrace. The sunlight barely touched its facade, absorbed instead by the heavy, colonial yellow paint that clung to the stone like a faded memory. The real estate agent, a nervous woman with wide eyes that kept darting toward her watch, hurried through the walk-through with practiced efficiency. Her heels clicked sharply against the ceramic tiles that covered every surface, creating an eerie rhythm, like a ticking clock counting down to something inevitable. Those tiles would become my obsession in the days to come. Every pattern, every imperfection, each small detail in the house seemed to speak to me in a language I couldn't yet understand. 058. Her haste felt like an escape, though I couldn't pinpoint why. It's a good house, she said, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. She led me through rooms filled with dust-covered furniture, moving quickly from one space to another, as if hoping I wouldn't notice the strange air in the corners. I didn't understand then. I just assumed she was tired of showing the same property, day after day. The house's very stillness made the air feel thick, as if time had stalled here, and I was simply an outsider passing through. The lack of life, the odd calmness of it, made me uneasy. There were no birds outside, no hum of traffic, nothing that could break the silence. Just the faint creak of ancient wood and the soft rustling of the unkempt plants in the courtyard, swaying without a breeze. 1:10. As she finished her hurried walk through and left, her footsteps echoing down the hall, I was left alone in the house, trapped in the stillness. I set up my laptop in the small study that overlooked the interior courtyard, my only source of light in a room that seemed untouched by modernity. The dry fountain in the courtyard, with its cracked stone basin and wilted plants, seemed like a relic of forgotten promises. It looked out of place amidst the weight of the house, this silent reminder of nature's struggle against the encroaching cold stone. Despite the lack of any visible wind, the plants moved as if something unseen was coaxing them into motion. I tried to convince myself that it was simply the changing temperature, the settling of the old house. But deep down, I could feel it, the house was alive. 1:25. The first week passed uneventfully, or so I thought. I worked long hours in the study, trying to ignore the strange hum of the house. Each day, I found myself drawn to the oddities of the place. The way the walls seemed to breathe, contracting and expanding with every passing hour. The way shadows moved in the corners, darker and more deliberate as the day wore on. I kept my mind occupied with work, but something inside me was starting to unravel. The deeper I settled into the house, the more I felt it pushing back. There were sounds, groans of old wood and ancient stones. The house was settling, sure, but it felt like it was breathing, like it was shifting under the weight of its own history. The electric bulbs flickered as I worked, casting strange, angular shadows that stretched unnaturally across the room. It felt as though the house itself was casting its own form of dark light. The shadows seemed more like specters than simple tricks of the light. 1:38. I had rented the place for 3 months, a short period, I told myself. It was supposed to be an escape, a retreat, a place to focus, to work, to get away from the busy life I had back home. But now, as I sat in that room, illuminated only by the cold glow of my laptop, I wasn't sure what I had escaped to. I couldn't ignore it anymore, the house was holding me captive, whether I liked it or not. There was something in the air, something just beneath the surface, that I couldn't shake. It was as if the walls were alive with the stories of all the people who had come before me, people whose whispers I could almost hear, just on the edge of my awareness. It was more than just the weight of the house itself, it was the weight of everything it had witnessed. And as I sat there, staring at the screen, the feeling of being watched crept over me, growing stronger with each passing moment. The house wasn't just standing still. It was waiting for something. Waiting for me. 1:52. The work I had come to Columbia to do was simple enough, at least on the surface. It was supposed to be the sort of dry, academic research that required no belief in anything beyond documented facts and economic patterns, studying colonial trade routes, analyzing shipping manifests from the 1700s, and connecting the dots between countries and their exchange of goods. My life had always been anchored in tangible, objective truths. The irony of it wasn't lost on me. I had come to study history, but now I was beginning to feel as though history was studying me. I had imagined this research would provide some much-needed distance from the chaos of my life. But something in the house, something ancient and heavy, kept pressing on me. It was as if the weight of the house's past was watching me, waiting. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. I was a rational person. There was no place for the irrational in my work. 2:06. Then, on the 8th day, everything changed. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, no particular significance to the time, but it would come to mean everything to me later. I had been engrossed in the shipping manifests for hours, the dry facts swimming in front of my tired eyes. The room had been quiet, the only sound the tapping of my fingers on the keyboard and the faint hum of the old house settling. But suddenly, without warning, the temperature in the study plummeted. It was so sudden that I froze, staring in disbelief at the way my breath turned into a cloud before me, as if I had stepped outside into the heart of winter. I glanced around the room, my mind struggling to catch up with the strange sensation. This wasn't just a chill, this was something far colder. It wasn't the typical cooling of a room. It was the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, the kind that makes your teeth ache as though frost were creeping into your body from the inside out. 2:19. And here's the thing that defied all explanation, the cold didn't just fill the room, it followed me. When I stood up, it stayed close, hovering like a dark cloud of winter, clinging to my skin, seeping into the fabric of my clothes. My instinct was to move toward the window, perhaps to open it and let in fresh air, but as I did, the cold moved with me, there was no escape. It was as if I carried winter itself within me, an invisible shroud that refused to let go. I tried to shake it off, but my skin prickled with an unsettling awareness, a certainty that something beyond the physical world was at play. That's when I saw him. 2:37. Through the study's open doorway, across the main room, a figure walked. I blinked, my heart skipping a beat, thinking perhaps it was a trick of the light, my mind playing games with my senses. But no, he was real. The figure moved with slow deliberation, his footsteps barely making a sound on the old wooden floors. He was tall, clothed in what looked like period clothing, a dark coat that may have been fashionable 3 centuries ago, with a collar turned up against the cold. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought it was a trick of my eyes, that the shadows had played a cruel joke on me. But no, he was there, moving in the same direction I had just come from, toward the back of the house. The kind of figure you only see in history books or old portraits. I stood frozen, unable to move, my mind screaming to me that this was impossible. But he didn't vanish. He didn't flicker like a ghost might. He simply walked, his presence unmistakable, casting a long shadow across the dimly lit hallway. For a split second, he turned his head, and I could see his eyes, dark, almost black, like they were drawn from some abyss. His gaze locked onto mine, and in that moment, everything in the room shifted. The cold intensified, and the whispers I had heard in the house began again, louder this time, rising from the very walls themselves. 2:50. The figure continued on his path, disappearing into the shadows of the house. The room seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy, the air thickening as though I were breathing in something much heavier than oxygen. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think clearly. All I knew was that this wasn't a dream. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. The house had been hiding something, something that had waited centuries to reveal itself. And now, it was watching me. 2:51. He moved with purpose, crossing from the front entrance toward the kitchen in a straight line. His steps were deliberate, measured, there was no hesitation, no pause. His face never turned in my direction, his eyes never met mine. But what struck me the most was the silence. His footsteps made no sound on the ceramic tiles. Not a single creak of floorboards, not even a whisper of cloth brushing against fabric. The room, for a moment, seemed suspended in time. But then I noticed something even stranger. Each tile he passed seemed to distort the air around it, ripples forming in the space above the surface. It was as if the tiles themselves were bending, shifting under some invisible pressure, like heat waves in reverse. And the cold, the bitter cold, followed his every movement. The air around me seemed to freeze in place as he passed, a stark contrast to the warmth of the study behind me. It felt as if the temperature was clinging to him, pulling the very essence of winter into the house. 3:07. I couldn't help myself. I called out, not a greeting, but that wordless, startled sound we make when something completely unexpected takes us by surprise. My voice echoed through the empty hall, piercing the silence, but the figure didn't pause. He didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. He simply continued on his path, his movements calm, almost purposeful. His figure faded from my view as he passed beyond the open doorway. The moment he did, the temperature returned to normal so abruptly that I felt the sting of warmth flood back into my skin. It was like someone had snapped their fingers, ending a dream I couldn't quite wake from. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing to catch up with what had just happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? The cold. The figure. The way the air distorted as he walked. But then, my eyes landed on the floor, the tiles beneath my feet, the ones that had been untouched by anything, except him. 3:25. Curiosity, sharp and overpowering, overrode my caution. I had to know more. I had to see where he had gone, follow his path, trace his movements. Without thinking, I moved forward, my footsteps hesitant, echoing in the silence of the house. I followed the same route the figure had taken, moving cautiously toward the kitchen, step by step. It was then that I saw it, the cracks in the tiles. Each tile he had passed was marked. Not shattered or broken in the traditional sense, but scarred, like the surface of old stone worn by centuries of wear. Hairline fractures, delicate and subtle, forming intricate patterns. At first, they seemed like random imperfections, the sort you might ignore. But as I knelt to get a closer look, I recognized them. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the symbols etched into the tiles, faint but unmistakable. These weren't ordinary cracks. These were colonial symbols, used to mark property boundaries, trade agreements. A stylized compass rose, a merchant seal, and what looked like a simplified map of the Caribbean islands. Symbols I had seen before in the documents I had been studying, but never in such a direct, physical form. It was as though the very house had been marked by the trade routes I had spent so much time researching. I knelt closer, tracing the cracks with my finger, the coolness of the stone sending a shiver through my fingertips. Each mark, each fracture, seemed to tell a story, an old story, one I had only begun to understand. But why was it here? Why had these symbols appeared in the tiles after the figure passed? The questions flooded my mind, but I couldn't answer them. Not yet. There was something deeper, something more sinister hidden in this house than I had ever imagined. And as I sat there, surrounded by these strange markings, I realized that my research had just become something far more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. 3:59. With my fingertip, I traced the markings on the tile, and the sensation sent a chill through my entire body. They were real, undeniably cold to the touch, and definitely fresh. The cement between the tiles was still damp, an unnatural moisture clinging to the surface as though the house itself had just exhaled. It was impossible for the house to be this humid. It had been empty for months, yet the dampness seemed to cling to the tiles, unwilling to leave. The rational part of my mind immediately began its defensive work, drawing on the lessons I had learned over years of academic study. Old houses settled unpredictably. Temperature changes, especially in a place with the history of this one, could cause ceramic to crack in unexpected patterns. My eyes, exhausted from hours of screen work, could have created visual patterns where none existed. After all, the human brain was excellent at finding meaning in randomness, often seeing faces in clouds or recognizing patterns that weren't really there. I tried to cling to this logic, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was simply fooling myself. Rationality couldn't explain the cold that had followed me, or the absolute clarity with which I had seen the man, a figure who cast no shadow. 4:16. That night, unable to sleep, I picked up the phone and called my sister in Boston. I didn't call her to discuss what had happened, I wasn't ready to voice it, let alone hear myself say something impossible out loud. But I needed to hear a familiar voice. I needed something solid to tether me to the world I knew, the one where colonial ghosts didn't wander through rented houses in the middle of the night. She picked up after the third ring, her voice warm and comforting. "You okay?" she asked, her tone light. I could almost hear the soft clinking of her coffee mug in the background. "You sound tired. Are you eating well? Getting enough sleep?" Her normal, mundane concerns felt like an anchor in the chaos of my thoughts. For a moment, I hesitated. I wanted to tell her everything, the figure, the cold, the symbols and the tiles, but something inside me held back. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. 4:29. "Everything's fine," I said, the words coming out before I could think better of it. Cartagena's beautiful, and my work's going well. Just a little tired, that's all. I didn't mention the relentless feeling of being watched, or the unease that settled in my chest every time I closed my eyes. I didn't tell her how the walls of the house seemed to whisper when I wasn't listening, or how the shadows never truly seemed to leave the corners. "All right," she said, her voice softening. "But make sure you take care of yourself, okay? You're not alone out there, you know. If you ever need to talk about anything, I'm here." I forced a smile, though she couldn't see it. "Thanks, sis. I'll be fine." But as I hung up the phone and sat back in the chair, I realized I wasn't fine at all. 5:20. Progressing well. Both statements felt like lies. I could sense it, even if I didn't want to admit it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The house seemed more alive in the darkness, filled with sounds that old buildings make, settling wood, shifting stones, the distant murmur of the Caribbean breeze whispering through the shutters. But underneath those explainable noises, something else lingered, something that didn't belong. Footsteps that followed no discernible pattern, as if someone were pacing in a room I couldn't see. Doors creaking open and closed in spaces I had already checked, their hinges groaning in that slow, deliberate rhythm. And the soft rustling of fabric against walls, almost imperceptible, but it was there, like someone brushing past me in the dark. I found myself listening with an intensity that made my ears ring. The silence, punctuated by the sounds, seemed alive. Every noise became significant, every absence of sound pregnant with possibility. Was it my imagination playing tricks on me, or was something else moving within the walls of the house? 5:39. By morning, I had convinced myself that stress and isolation were playing tricks on my perception. A few days in a new environment, immersed in historical documents about a colonial period marked by exploitation and suffering. Of course, my subconscious would conjure appropriate imagery, shadows of the past, echoes of those who had suffered here. The mind was a powerful engine for creating meaning, especially when that meaning confirmed existing anxieties. I tried to push it all out of my mind. The sounds. The whispers. The cold that moved with me. Surely, it was just stress. I was overworked. The house was old, and these noises were nothing more than the normal creaks and groans of an aging structure. 5:57. But even as I tried to rationalize, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house wasn't just old, it felt like it was watching me. I had to keep my focus. I needed to get through the day, to finish my work and return to my normal life, where things made sense. But I couldn't help but feel that my mind was unraveling, and that whatever force was inside this house was pulling at the threads of my sanity. I decided to ignore what had happened. Focus on my research. Let the rational part of my mind take charge. The decision lasted until 3 o'clock that afternoon. 6:17. This time, I was ready. I had positioned myself in the main room with a view of the entire space. My laptop was closed. My attention was focused. I was going to ignore the strange sounds, the unsettling presence. I would finish what I had come to do. No more distractions. But the house had a different plan. 6:52. At exactly 3 p.m., the cold returned. It wasn't like the usual chill that sometimes brushed against your skin. No, this was something else entirely. It started as a subtle prickling along my spine, the kind that makes you immediately aware of the air around you, as if it's no longer part of the world you inhabit. Then it spread outward, as if an invisible force had poured liquid nitrogen onto the floor, creating that same localized sphere of winter air that defied every law of thermodynamics I understood. The temperature had dropped so suddenly, I could feel my breath fogging in the air again, sharp and biting. And there he was. He appeared in the same place, near the front entrance, exactly as he had before. Same dark coat, same deliberate pace, same eerie silence that filled the space like a vacuum. He walked with that same haunting precision, and for the first time, I noticed details I had missed before, details that fear had blocked out during the previous encounter. 7:05. His face was gaunt, marked with deep lines that spoke of chronic stress rather than the passing of time. There was a weariness there, one that didn't belong to the living, an exhaustion that no amount of rest could heal. His eyes never left the path ahead of him. It was as though he had walked this same route for so long that his mind no longer needed to direct him. His steps were automatic, as if guided by some invisible force, an internal compass that never wavered, never deviated. This time, the details were impossible to ignore. His movements were fluid, yet rigid, as though his body had grown accustomed to this unnatural journey, this ceaseless repetition. I could see the strain in his posture, the fatigue in his every step, as if he was bound to this place, bound to this walk for eternity. 7:27. When he reached the spot where his path would take him beyond my line of sight, something changed. Without breaking his steady rhythm, he stopped. He turned, slowly, too slowly, and looked directly at me. It wasn't just a glance. It wasn't a casual look. His eyes met mine with a heavy, crushing weight, and in that moment, the cold intensified. It surged through the room like a violent shockwave, rattling the windows and biting through my skin. My hands began to shake, my heart racing in my chest, as I felt the icy grip of terror close around me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His gaze held me in place, and the air around us seemed to thicken, to pulse with a strange, dark energy. 7:41. His eyes were not filled with malice or anger, but something far worse, something deeper, something older. They held the weight of centuries, the weight of a lifetime lived over and over again. But it wasn't wisdom I saw in them. It was exhaustion. The bone-deep tiredness of someone who had been walking the same path for longer than memory could contain, someone whose body had been worn thin by time, by repetition, by the unyielding cycle of whatever force bound him to this house. When our gazes met, there was no communication between us, no words, no gestures, no understanding. There was only recognition. 8:01. He knew I could see him. I could feel it in the air between us, a silent acknowledgement that passed like a ripple through the frozen room. And in that moment, I knew something else with a certainty that surged through me before my mind could fully process it. This was not the first time someone had watched him make this walk. This was not the first time he had been seen. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't the first person to live in this house. I wasn't the first person to encounter him. Whatever this was, it had been happening for far longer than I could comprehend. And somehow, this house, this place, had trapped him. Or maybe he had trapped it. Maybe he had been walking this path, over and over, for centuries, and now I had become part of his endless journey. And I wondered, with a sickening certainty, how long I would remain here before I, too, became a part of this cycle. 8:20. He turned away and continued his path, moving with the same eerie purpose. As he did, fresh cracks appeared in the ceramic tiles beneath him, new fissures that formed strange symbols, symbols I didn't recognize, symbols that hadn't been there before. As he disappeared into the darkness of the house, the temperature slowly returned to normal, and with it, my body began to react. But this time, I wasn't shaking from the cold. No, it was something deeper, something primal, the kind of fear that rises when the universe reveals itself to be far stranger, far less stable than we pretend it is. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the new markings in the tiles, unable to shake the feeling that I was witnessing something ancient, something that shouldn't exist in the world I knew. My rational mind fought to reclaim control, but the grip of that fear was too strong. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling, and photographed the new cracks, knowing that this wasn't the kind of evidence I would be able to explain away. 8:33. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I spent hours researching colonial symbolism, searching for any clue that might explain the symbols I had found. And yet, the more I dug, the more unsettling the findings became. The patterns matched merchant codes used during the Spanish colonial period, codes designed to mark safe passage routes, places where traders could travel without fear of interference. But these particular symbols were different. They indicated something else, something far darker. These were not just marks of safe passage. They were warnings, warnings about disputed territory, areas where different authorities claimed jurisdiction. Places where travelers might disappear into legal limbo, where the boundaries between territories were unclear, and where people could vanish without a trace. The realization hit me like a hammer. The cracks in the tiles weren't just random, they were intentional. The house wasn't just haunted, it was marking something, communicating something. The rational explanations I had clung to were beginning to feel thin, stretched too far over a growing certainty that something was trying to communicate with me. And it wasn't speaking in words, it was speaking through cracked ceramics and impossible cold. 9:05. That evening, in a desperate attempt to regain my sense of balance, I decided to take a walk through the old quarter. I needed fresh air, and maybe, just maybe, the presence of living, breathing people would ground me, restore my equilibrium. The streets of Cartagena were a stark contrast to the isolation of the house. The city was alive, buzzing with energy. Vendors lined the sidewalks, their stalls overflowing with colorful fabrics, spices, and trinkets. Tourists wandered the cobbled streets, laughing and chatting in a dozen different languages. Children kicked soccer balls in small plazas, their joyful shouts echoing through the narrow streets. The city hummed with life, a world away from the cold silence of the house. Every surface was touched by sunlight, the golden rays illuminating the buildings, the faces, the chaos of everyday life. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, filling my lungs with the warmth of the air. The city's pulse was a relief, a reminder that life still existed outside the walls of that house. But as I walked through the streets, the weight of the house's presence stayed with me. It clung to my thoughts, its symbols and shadows haunting the corners of my mind. The cold, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, it was all still there, waiting for me to return. And no matter how far I walked, no matter how many people I passed, I knew that the house was never far behind. 9:34. The Caribbean sunlight seemed to burn away shadows, stripping them of their mystery and leaving nothing but warmth in its wake. The streets, bathed in golden light, hummed with life as I wandered deeper into the heart of Cartagena. I stopped at a small cafe, seeking solace in the bustling energy of the city. An elderly man behind the counter served me coffee so strong it could wake the dead. I sipped it slowly, savoring the rich bitterness, hoping it would chase away the strange thoughts clouding my mind. But when I mentioned the address of the house where I was staying, his expression shifted. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by a look I couldn't quite place, a mix of concern, wariness, and something else I couldn't identify. He looked at me with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for people displaying symptoms of mental illness, as though he had heard this story before but was reluctant to acknowledge it. 9:47. Have you noticed anything unusual about the house? He asked, his voice low, as if the very question might summon something. The question hung in the air between us like smoke, thick and heavy. For a moment, I could have laughed it off. I could have dismissed it, maintained the fiction that nothing strange was happening. I could have told him I was just tired, or that the house was old and settling, nothing more. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself telling him everything, about the cold that followed me, about the figure in the hallway, about the cracked tiles that seemed to hold ancient symbols. I felt a strange compulsion to speak, as if saying the words out loud might make sense of the chaos swirling inside my mind. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. It was as though my words confirmed something he had already suspected, something he had seen before. Then, in a voice thick with old memories, he began to speak. 10:01. He told me about Don Eduardo Herrera, a colonial-era merchant who had owned that house in the 1740s. Herrera had made his fortune in the Caribbean trade, dealing in goods that ranged from spices to sugar, from rum to slaves. But his success had come at a cost far greater than money. He made certain accommodations with authorities, the old man said, with people who operated outside normal legal frameworks, people whose power extended far beyond what was seen in the daylight. Herrera's compromises had been many, the old man explained. He had been forced to forget what he had seen, to ignore what he had known, and to keep walking the same paths that led him into murky waters, into a world where laws didn't matter, and where the price of success was far steeper than he could have ever imagined. 10:20. These were not just metaphorical paths, the old man explained. Herrera had literally walked these paths that twisted and turned through realms beyond the physical world, through dimensions that couldn't be mapped by any known cartographer. These were the paths that had led him into dark pacts, into deals with forces that couldn't be undone. The story didn't end with Herrera's death, as I expected. No. It ended with his inability to stop walking. Even after his death, his soul was bound to the house, to the paths he had walked. He could never stop, could never rest. His ghost, if it was indeed a ghost, was trapped in the endless cycle of walking those same routes, over and over again. The old man's words resonated in my mind, chilling me even as the warmth of the coffee began to settle into my bones. 10:38. I thanked him for the coffee and the story, treating both as equally satisfying but not fully understanding their implications. I paid for the drink and walked back through the darkening streets of Cartagena, my mind racing with the details the old man had shared. But as I moved through the narrow streets, his words followed me, lingering like the footsteps of someone walking behind me in the dark, footsteps I couldn't quite hear but couldn't escape. By the time I reached the house, the night had fully settled in, the city's vibrant energy replaced by the eerie quiet of the darkened streets. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was waiting for me, its cold presence already creeping along the edges of my mind. That night, I dreamed. 10:56. I dreamed of trade routes that didn't follow geography, of paths that led through dimensions rather than continents. I saw merchants who sold more than just spices or rum, who peddled goods that shouldn't have been possible, items that could tear the fabric of reality itself. I saw the figure from the house, his face gaunt and tired, walking through these impossible paths, his footsteps echoing in a place where time no longer existed. And through it all, I felt the pull of the house, its cold touch reaching out to me, drawing me back into its dark history. When I awoke, the morning light did little to chase away the feeling that I had crossed into something far beyond my understanding. And the house was waiting. 11:13. I awoke with the absolute certainty that someone was watching me sleep. It was an unsettling thought that clung to me like a shadow, lingering even as I opened my eyes. I turned on the lights, expecting to find some explanation, but the room was empty, silent and still. The only trace of the presence I felt was a faint scent in the air, the smell of wool mixed with the briny tang of the sea. It was so subtle, so strange, that it almost felt like a memory rather than something in the present. A memory that didn't belong to me. I shook off the feeling as best I could, trying to convince myself it was just the house's eerie atmosphere playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. Something, or someone, was in the room with me. 11:30. The next afternoon, I waited for 3 p.m. with the anticipation of a researcher on the verge of a significant discovery. I had prepared myself this time, camera at the ready, notebook open, and every sense focused on documenting what happened. I was determined to capture the moment, to prove to myself that what I was experiencing was real, not just a product of stress or isolation. The clock ticked on, and then, at exactly 3 o'clock, the cold arrived, just as it had before. The temperature dropped so quickly I felt it in my bones, an icy breath that filled the room. And then, like clockwork, he appeared, the figure I had seen before, dressed in his dark coat, moving with the same deliberate, mechanical pace. But this time, he wasn't alone. 11:45. 3 figures walked the path in single file, each separated by perhaps 50 years of fashion. The first wore Herrera's dark coat, just as I had seen before, his silhouette cutting through the dim room like a shadow from another time. The second figure was dressed in the style of the early 1800s, a sharp suit with high collars, the kind worn by men who had long since passed into history. The third wore a suit that might have been fashionable in the 1920s, the sharply tailored jacket and creased trousers somehow making him seem out of place, a ghost from a time I barely recognized. They all followed the same route, with the same mechanical precision, as if they were walking the same path they had walked 1,000 times before. Each figure left behind symbolic cracks in the tiles, just like the previous time. The cracks that now covered the floor like an intricate map, marking a history that couldn't be erased. They weren't just random imperfections, they were deliberate, purposeful, as though the very ground beneath them was part of the story. 12:05. The cold, however, was different this time. It was no longer localized to just my position, it filled the entire room. The temperature plunged so drastically that my breath became visible in the air, hanging there like a ghost. The air turned heavy, and a painful burn crept over my skin, the kind of pain that comes from touching dry ice, a searing cold that seemed to freeze me in place. As the procession reached the point where they would normally disappear from view, something extraordinary happened. All three figures stopped. They didn't continue on their path, as they had before. Instead, they turned, their movements synchronized in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. 12:17. They turned to look directly at me. Their eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, held the same recognition I had seen before, but this time, it was multiplied. There was no longer just the exhaustion of one soul trapped in an endless loop, now, there were three. The weariness in their gaze wasn't just fatigue, it was something deeper, something far more desperate. They weren't just tired, they were drowning in repetition, caught in a cycle they could not escape. I could see it in the way their eyes locked onto mine, as if they were waiting for something. But what? Recognition? Sympathy? Was this some sort of warning? Or had they, too, been drawn into the same trap, the same unending walk through time that I now found myself caught in? I didn't know. But in that moment, I felt it, their pain. Their torment. The weight of endless days that blurred together, indistinguishable from one another. They were trapped in something far worse than death, they were trapped in a repetition that couldn't be broken. And as I stood there, frozen in place, I understood something else. I wasn't just witnessing these figures. I was becoming part of their cycle, part of the story that the house had been waiting to tell. 12:40. They were trapped in a cycle that demanded they keep walking the same path, day after day, year after year, while reality itself seemed to slowly crack around them, disintegrating into something more and more distorted. The youngest of the three, the man in the 1920s suit, opened his mouth as if to speak. His lips moved, but no sound emerged, an eerie, unnatural silence. Yet, despite the absence of words, I understood. It wasn't through speech that the message was delivered, but through something far more disorienting, sudden knowledge, as if a file had been downloaded directly into my consciousness, bypassing my mind and planting itself into my thoughts. I understood, then, that they weren't ghosts. They weren't the phantoms of the dead, lingering in some realm between life and death. They were still alive, still walking, still trapped in a journey that had begun 3 centuries ago, and would continue for 3 more. 12:53. The house wasn't haunted in the way I had imagined. It wasn't some place where spirits roamed, unable to find rest. No, it was something else entirely. The house was a way station, a checkpoint along a route that existed parallel to our world, one that intersected with it only at specific times and locations. And now, I was part of that intersection. I was being invited to join them. 13:06. The realization came with a flood of additional knowledge, knowledge I neither wanted nor could reject. It was as if the house itself had unlocked a hidden truth, and now I could no longer unsee it. The route they walked, the path they were trapped on, wasn't limited to this house. It extended throughout the colonial world, weaving through the Caribbean, South America, and Spain. It connected the old trade networks, networks that had existed outside normal legal frameworks, operating in the shadows of history, in places where the laws of man could not touch. Every afternoon, at precisely 3 p.m., in hundreds of locations across the Caribbean, South America, and Spain, these merchants, alive, not dead, continued their work. They carried goods that couldn't be described, peddling wares that had no names, no forms, no definition. They served customers who paid in currencies that had no value, currencies that didn't exist in any known exchange. 1318. The invitation wasn't optional. My presence in the house, my ability to see them, these figures from the past, wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't the product of imagination or hallucination. I had been chosen, or perhaps I had simply crossed some threshold that no one had warned me about. My ability to see them, to witness their endless march, meant I was now part of this world, part of this cycle, whether I liked it or not. They had invited me, whether knowingly or not, to join them in their endless, repetitive journey. A journey that had no end, no escape, only an eternal return. I could feel it, deep within me, in the marrow of my bones. This house was a crossroads, and I was standing at the precipice of something far larger, far darker, than anything I could have imagined. The cold, once again, crept through the room, but this time, it wasn't just the air that was cold. It was my thoughts, my mind, the very concept of time itself. And as I stood there, the figures in their worn, shifting clothes turned and began their walk once more, as if nothing had changed. Except for me. 1403. The fact that I had witnessed their passage 3 times, the cold, the figures, the cracks in the tiles, meant something more than I had yet been able to fully understand. It wasn't just an anomaly or a trick of the mind. No, it meant I had been selected, recruited even, into a system that predated any government, any economy, anything I had ever known. A system that had existed long before me and would likely continue to exist long after I was gone. This was not a world of logic or reason, it was something far older, far more persistent. The cracks in the tiles weren't just random symbols, not merely markings left by time or wear. They were a map that I had been asked to learn, to understand, to follow. And as I stood there, staring at the patterns in the floor, I realized that this wasn't just about observing. This was about becoming part of it, becoming part of the route, part of the endless march that those figures had been walking for centuries. 1416. The 3 figures waited with infinite patience, as if they had known I would come to this understanding in my own time. The cold around me had grown stronger, more oppressive. It was no longer just a chill in the air, it was a living thing, pressing against my skin, seeping into my bones. The cold filled my lungs, making each breath a conscious effort. It felt as though the air itself had become dense with the weight of centuries, suffocating me, urging me to relent. 1428. Time, too, seemed to shift. It no longer moved in the way I had always known it to. Seconds stretched into hours, as though the presence of these figures bent the very fabric of time itself. Outside the house, life continued at its normal pace, but within the walls, everything felt distorted. I could feel my resistance weakening, not through some external force, but through the slow, quiet erosion of my certainty about what was real and what was possible. The skepticism that had always protected me, that had always been my shield against the unknown, began to feel like just another form of self-deception. A comfortable lie I had clung to, a defense against the overwhelming evidence of my own senses. 1446. And yet, even as I felt that resistance crumbling, there was a part of me, the part that had always questioned authority, the part that refused easy answers, that recognized the truth in what was happening. This was how it happened, I understood now. Not through dramatic confrontations or grand revelations, but through the gradual, insidious acceptance of the impossible. One small compromise at a time. First, you see them. Then you hear them. Then, you start to understand. It was happening slowly, piece by piece, like the cracks in the tiles themselves. Each step forward, no matter how small, was a step toward acceptance. Not of what was normal, but of what was. And I realized, with a sickening clarity, that I was already too far in to turn back. 1459. I had crossed the threshold. The cold, the figures, the tiles, they were all part of it. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was becoming part of the system, part of the cycle, whether I wanted to or not. And just like the figures who had walked before me, I would continue. There was no escaping it. The question now was whether I would fight it or accept it, whether I would walk the same path they had, or try to find my own way out. But the more I thought about it, the more the choice seemed like a distant memory. It felt as though I had never truly had control over the path I was on. This was how it happened. One step at a time. 15:15. Then you understand them. Then you join them. The thought hung in the air like a warning, too heavy to ignore. Once you start walking their route, you never stop. That was the truth, the horrible, undeniable truth. I closed my eyes, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I counted to 10, giving myself a moment to choose between sanity and truth. Between the safe, comfortable world I knew and the dangerous one that had existed all along, one that had been hidden from me by my own disbelief. When I opened my eyes, the figures were gone. The cold had dissipated, and the room felt like it had returned to normal. The temperature was as it should be, and the tiles, once marked with symbols and cracks, now seemed like any ordinary floor. There was no sign of the strange path they had walked. But the knowledge, the awful, undeniable knowledge, remained. It sat in my mind like a seed, planted deeply in my consciousness, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. I could never forget what I had seen. I could never undo the understanding that had been forced into me. 15:34. I packed my belongings that night. It wasn't a decision made out of fear, though I did feel a deep, gnawing dread. It was more the weight of inevitability pressing down on me. I wasn't ready to walk their path, not yet, but I knew I could never unlearn what had been taught to me. I couldn't stay in Cartagena any longer. I had to leave. The next morning, I called the real estate agent. I explained my early departure, citing personal reasons, though I knew that wasn't the full truth. She didn't question me, didn't ask for details. She simply acknowledged my decision, as if she had heard this story before. Her voice, detached and professional, carried no surprise. 15:48. I left Cartagena 3 weeks before my rental was scheduled to end. The cobblestone streets, the house, the figures, they became nothing more than a distant memory, one I buried deep in my mind. But the knowledge was there, always. Waiting. 16:01. Now, I'm back in Boston, writing this account while sitting in my university office. The fluorescent lights overhead burn away all the shadows, and the world operates according to the rules I understand, rules I can verify and trust. The laws of time and space, the order of logic that I had always believed in, are in place again. Everything is as it should be, or so I tell myself. My research project, the one that brought me to Cartagena, was completed. I used digital archives and secondary sources, never returning to the colonial quarter, never walking those cobblestone streets again. The world I had returned to was familiar, safe, predictable. But every day, at 3 p.m., no matter where I am, I feel it. That pull. That cold. And I know, without a doubt, that the figures are still walking. That they still follow their path, that their journey continues through dimensions and time, just as it has for centuries. I know that the route is not over. It never ends. And I wonder, will they come for me again? 16:27. I feel a subtle chill along my spine. It's fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it's there. A whisper of cold that makes me pause, makes me look down. I catch myself searching for cracks in whatever floor I'm standing on, instinctively scanning for those marks I thought I'd left behind. The knowledge they gave me hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown stronger, more insistent. It's no longer just a memory, it's a presence. A constant, nagging feeling that lingers in the back of my mind. 16:40. And with it comes a growing certainty, a certainty that my early departure from Cartagena wasn't an escape. It was a postponement. The invitation remains open, like a door that never truly closed. The route continues to exist, threading its way across space and time, connecting points where commerce operates according to older rules than supply and demand, rules I am only beginning to understand. The house, the figures, the cracks in the tiles, they still exist, and I can feel them waiting, just beyond the veil of everyday life. Somewhere, in a yellow house in Cartagena, ceramic tiles are still cracking in patterns that map journeys no living person should have to make. 1658. I tell myself it was stress. Isolation. The power of suggestion, working on a mind immersed in colonial history. That's all it was, I reason. It was just the weight of the past, bleeding into my consciousness, that created the illusion of something otherworldly. I've returned to my normal life, my rational worldview, my comfortable skepticism about things that can't be measured or proven. Everything is as it should be, I tell myself. It's easier to believe in the safety of logic than to acknowledge the uncertainty creeping at the edges of my thoughts. 1716. But late at night, when the academic certainty of daylight feels thin, when the world reveals itself to be stranger than our theories allow, I remember. I remember the weight of centuries in those exhausted eyes. I remember the cold, the figures, and the tiles. I remember how I felt, seen, in a way that no one should be seen. How can I forget the invitation that was never truly rescinded? How long can I keep refusing to acknowledge what I know to be true? 1730. The tiles in my apartment bathroom have started showing hairline cracks that weren't there before. At first, I thought it was just wear and tear, maybe the humidity. But now, I'm not so sure. They don't form any recognizable pattern yet, but I know that's how it starts. One small crack, one tiny fracture, that deepens with each passing day, until it spreads. And when it does, it will lead somewhere. Somewhere I can't yet see. 1743. I've stopped looking too closely. Some roots, once revealed, are difficult to ignore forever. I know I can't erase what I've seen, what I've felt, no matter how hard I try to convince myself it's just in my head. The cracks, the figures, the knowledge, it stays with me, hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to push its way back into my thoughts. And I know it will. It always does. Story 2. The clay felt wrong under my fingertips. I should have turned back when I first noticed it, the peculiar coldness seeping through the reddish earth, as if something had drained all warmth from the hillside. The sensation was subtle at first, like the touch of a shadow creeping along my skin, but it soon became impossible to ignore. Still, I didn't stop. I had driven 3 hours to reach this remote trail in the Appalachian foothills, and my pride wouldn't let me retreat now. This was Devil's Backbone, the locals had called it, a name that felt more fitting with each step I took. A near-vertical clay cliff that jutted out from the forest like a broken bone, jagged and unnatural. The mist hung thick around it, clinging to the tree-line below, creating an unsettling silence that seemed to muffle even my own breathing. No birds sang, no insects hummed, just the heavy quiet of the mist and the soft scraping of my boots against the unstable surface as I began my ascent. 1803. Each step sent small avalanches of rusty earth tumbling into the void below, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this climb was more than just a hike. It was as if the mountain itself was resisting me, pushing back against my presence. The sensation grew stronger the higher I climbed. The mist seemed to envelop the mountain, closing in around me, thickening with every step I took. There was no escape from it, no clearing ahead. It felt as though I were being swallowed by the earth itself. 1817. I had been climbing for 20 minutes when the sensation started, the crawling awareness between my shoulder blades that meant someone, or something, was watching. I froze, my body instinctively pressing against the cliff face, as if trying to hide from whatever was behind me. I glanced down the slope, hoping to see some trace of the trail I had followed to reach the base of the cliff. But it was gone. Completely vanished in the thick, white shroud of fog that surrounded me. 1832. My heart raced as I pressed my back to the cliff and tried to steady my breathing. The silence was almost suffocating. My fingers searched the surface of the cliff for a grip, something solid to anchor myself to this reality, and found a narrow crack. I hauled myself higher, the effort made harder by the growing unease crawling through my veins. The clay here felt different, almost gritty, as though it were made up of something foreign. Something that didn't belong. My fingers brushed against the rough surface, and when I brought my hand closer to examine it, I was hit with an overwhelming sense of wrongness. The grit was too fine, too smooth, and it left a strange residue on my hand. I wiped it against my pants, but the feeling of it lingered, crawling beneath my skin, a silent reminder that the earth itself was not what it seemed. 1844. I hesitated, the pull to climb higher and the nagging suspicion that I had already gone too far fighting inside me. But I couldn't turn back now. Something in the air, something in the quiet of the mountain, told me that if I stopped now, I might never leave. The mist closed in further, until I could barely make out the cliff face in front of me. I could feel the weight of the mountain pressing down, suffocating me, and I knew that if I didn't finish this ascent, if I didn't reach the top, I might never understand what was waiting for me here. 1912. I noticed dark flecks mixed in with the red earth, small, irregular fragments that looked organic, as if they were pieces of something that had once been alive. They didn't belong in the clay, didn't match the smooth texture of the hill beneath my boots. The wind picked up, suddenly sharp, carrying with it an odor I couldn't quite place, metallic, pungent, like copper pennies left out in the rain. The scent hit me like a memory, one from childhood, something buried deep within the recesses of my mind. I couldn't grasp it completely, but it stirred an inexplicable dread in my stomach, a fear I couldn't justify. The smell tugged at something I couldn't identify, and I had to force myself to breathe steadily, not allowing the weight of that distant memory to pull me under. 1930. Halfway up the cliff, the feeling of being observed intensified, and this time, it wasn't just a vague sensation. It was a physical pressure, as if invisible eyes were cataloging my every movement. My skin prickled, and I couldn't shake the idea that I was being measured for something I didn't understand. A strange, uncomfortable awareness began to crawl up my spine, and for the first time, I wondered if I was being tested, if the mountain itself was evaluating my worthiness for some unknown purpose. I tried to push it out of my mind, forcing myself to focus on the climb. Each handhold felt more tenuous than the last, the clay beneath me crumbling away at my touch, the weight of every step feeling heavier as I moved higher. But my peripheral vision kept catching movement. Shadows, flickering in and out of view. Shapes that shifted when they shouldn't, disappearing when I turned to look directly at them. 1945. The sensation of being watched, of being followed, had evolved into something more intimate, more invasive. It wasn't just an external gaze anymore. It felt as though whatever observed me was drawing closer, pressing in on me, studying me with a hunger, an intensity that made my skin crawl. I could almost feel it, whatever it was, closing the distance, waiting for something. I couldn't explain it, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back. To leave. To forget this climb. But I didn't. I couldn't. 2002. The clay beneath me became increasingly unstable the higher I climbed. Each step felt like a gamble, the earth shifting under my feet. Chunks of clay broke away at my touch, sending small avalanches of dirt tumbling into the void below. I had to test each handhold carefully before committing my full weight, my body straining with the effort to maintain my grip. Sweat beaded on my forehead, though the air was cool, and my breathing grew labored. I was struggling, my hands slipping in the gritty earth, my muscles aching with the effort. It felt like the mountain was trying to push me back, to make me give up, to send me crashing back down. I kept climbing, the weight of the climb pressing on me, but the sensation of being watched didn't fade. It only intensified. 2014. I was perhaps 30 feet from the top when it happened. Without warning, my left foot slipped. One moment, I was balanced, focused on the next step, and the next, I was plunging downward. The cliffside crumbled beneath me, and a cascade of clay tumbled loose, sending me into a free fall. For a split second, I felt weightless, suspended in the air, before the ground rushed up to meet me, the earth giving way beneath my body, and I felt myself sliding, tumbling, my arms reaching for something, anything, to stop my fall. 20:35. I tumbled into the mist below, my body falling faster than I could react. My right hand stretched too far for a questionable hold, but it slipped, and for one terrifying moment, I hung by my fingertips from a narrow ledge. The weight of my gear pulled me backward, threatening to drag me down the sheer cliffside. The void below seemed to stretch endlessly, and the thought of the fall, the kind of fall that would break every bone in my body, flashed in my mind like a horrible truth. That's when I felt it. 20:55. A firm palm pressed against my climbing vest, right between my shoulder blades. The touch was unmistakably human, warm and solid, pushing me forward, against the cliff face, with just enough force to help me regain my balance. It was gentle yet firm, a guiding hand in the chaos of my fall. I scrambled for new handholds, my heart hammering against my ribs, adrenaline coursing through my veins. With frantic determination, I managed to pull myself onto a more stable section of the ascent, my fingers digging into the rock. 21:12. Once I was secure, I twisted around immediately, expecting to see another climber, someone who had taken a different route up the cliff, someone who had reached the ledge ahead of me. I couldn't have been alone, not with that unmistakable touch, the warmth of the hand that had helped me. But there was nothing behind me. There was nothing but empty air, the dizzying drop to the forest below stretching out beneath me. No ropes, no gear, no sign that anyone else had been there at all. Just the same unbroken surface of the cliff, slick and treacherous, and the dense fog swirling around me. 21:24. My hands shook as I clung to the rock, struggling to process what had just happened. The palm, the pressure, it had been real. I could still feel the spot where it had touched my vest, could still sense the warmth it left behind, as if it were somehow burned into the fabric of the climb itself. But that was impossible. No one could have reached that spot without equipment. I'd seen the path ahead of me. The climb was too dangerous for anyone to have made it up without ropes or specialized gear. I hadn't seen anyone on the cliff when I started my ascent, and no one had passed me. Yet, there it was, a hand, a touch, as real as anything in this world. I was alone. Or at least, that's what I had thought. Now, I wasn't so sure. 21:54. There were no other climbers on the trail, and the wind gusted again, stronger this time, carrying with it a sound that made my blood freeze. The soft scrape of boots on stone, coming from directly above me. Someone was moving on the cliff face overhead. Their footsteps were deliberate, measured, each one falling in a rhythm as if they were descending to meet me. I paused, trying to make sense of it. The wind? A trick of the ears? But no, the sound was unmistakable. Someone was on the mountain with me, moving above, so close I could almost hear their breath. 22:06. I forced myself to resume climbing, driven now by something beyond mere determination. The sensation of being pursued, of being followed, pushed me forward. I couldn't allow myself to look back. The footsteps continued, always just out of sight, matching my pace with an eerie precision. When I paused, they paused. When I moved, they moved. It was as though my unseen companion was mirroring my every action, maintaining a constant, calculated distance between us. It wasn't random, it felt intentional, deliberate. Whoever was up there knew exactly what they were doing. I tried to quicken my pace, but the footsteps above did the same. They stayed with me, never rushing ahead or falling behind, as if we were locked in a silent dance, with me climbing and them descending. 22:26. The footsteps above persisted, an unsettling echo of my own movements, until I reached the final 20 feet of the climb. This part of the cliff was far more treacherous. The clay here was loose, unstable, and crumbled at the slightest touch. I had to scramble, relying on momentum more than technique, each burst of movement feeling like a desperate grasp at survival. My hands, raw and bruised, slid over the brittle surface, desperately seeking a hold, any hold that might keep me from plummeting. The footsteps above had stopped. But the sensation of being watched, of being hunted, had intensified, thickening in the air like smoke, suffocating in its persistence. It wasn't just in my mind anymore. I could feel it. The weight of eyes upon me, close and unseen, as though the mountain itself had come alive, and whatever had followed me was now waiting for me to make the final, fatal misstep. 22:58. When I finally hauled myself over the edge and onto the flat summit, my legs gave out from exhaustion and nervous tension. I collapsed onto my back, staring up at the gray sky, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I tried to slow my racing heart. The silence up here was more profound than it had been below. No wind, no distant hum of traffic, nothing but the sound of my own labored breathing echoing in the stillness. For several minutes, I lay there, trying to regain my bearings, trying to convince myself that the worst of the climb was over. But even in the quiet, something felt wrong. The air was too still, too heavy, as if the summit itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. 23:18. Eventually, I rolled over and pushed myself to my feet, my muscles protesting the movement. Surveying my surroundings, I took in the summit. It was smaller than I had expected, perhaps 20 feet across, covered with sparse grass and a few stunted trees clinging to the rocky soil. The landscape was harsh, barren, and the sky above seemed to loom closer, as though the mountain were pressing down on me. But what captured my attention immediately were the tracks. Boot prints, clear and fresh, pressed deep into the soft earth near the cliff's edge. Military-style boots, judging by the distinctive tread pattern, size 11 or 12, the kind of boots worn by someone who knew how to traverse terrain like this. 23:36. The tracks appeared suddenly, about 10 feet from where I had emerged, as if their owner had materialized from thin air. I froze for a moment, a cold chill crawling up my spine. The prints were perfectly preserved, deep and precise, with no signs of age or weathering, despite being exposed to the elements. Each impression was sharp, as though the person who made them had stepped into the earth with the weight of something significant. The more I looked at them, the more unsettled I became. Whoever had made these tracks had not been here long, but their presence was unmistakable. It felt as though the summit was not just a point on the mountain, but a place where something, or someone, had been waiting. 23:52. I followed the tracks, my scalp tingling with apprehension. The prints led in a straight line toward the opposite side of the summit, where the land dropped off into the mist and the forest below. My feet moved of their own accord, my legs carrying me forward despite the rising fear twisting in my gut. The prints were not random, they were deliberate. They told a story of someone who had come here with purpose. The boots had dug into the earth with force, making a trail that was impossible to ignore. Whoever had walked here had been carrying significant weight, perhaps gear or equipment necessary for the task they had come to complete. And then, with every step I took, the feeling grew stronger, the feeling that I was not alone. 2400 hours 18. Perhaps it was equipment that would explain their presence on this remote clifftop. But as I traced the trail, my confusion deepened. The prints led directly to the edge of the cliff, but not the gradual slope that descended into the valley. No, they stopped at the sheer drop, the place where the mountain dropped away into nothingness. And there, at the very brink of the precipice, the prints simply ended. I crept forward, my stomach churning with vertigo, and peered over the edge. My heart raced as I took in the sight below. The cliff face was even more vertical than the route I had climbed, offering no possible foothold or ledge where someone could stand. There was no way to descend from this point, it was an impenetrable wall of rock. Yet, the final boot print was positioned exactly at the rim. The toe extended slightly over the edge, as if its owner had been standing in empty air, suspended just above the abyss. 2400 hours 45. The implications hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. No human being could have made that final print and survived. The position was impossible, defying every law of physics, every rule of common sense. Someone had stood there, on the edge, as if defying gravity itself. How? How? Yet there it was, clear as daylight, pressed into the earth with the same precision as all the others. A deliberate, calculated step right at the brink of the cliff, a step that had no place in reality. 2400 hours 57. I backed away from the edge, my mind reeling. The palm on my vest. The sense of being watched. The footprints. It all collided in my mind, too much for me to process in one moment. What was happening here? What was I really climbing? And what kind of presence was I dealing with? One that moved through time and space, one that defied all logic. I could feel my grip on the rational world slipping, like the very ground beneath me. This wasn't just a mountain. It wasn't just a cliff. It was something else entirely. Something that stretched beyond the normal, beyond explanation, beyond understanding. And somewhere, right here, in this place where reality bent, whatever had helped me climb, whatever had followed me, was waiting. 25:25. The footsteps during my climb, the impossible tracks, they all pointed to a presence that couldn't exist, shouldn't exist, yet had undeniably saved my life. The strange, inexplicable sensation of being helped, guided by an unseen hand, was now matched by the reality of these clues. Everything about this place, this mountain, told a story that defied logic, and yet, it was real. That's when I noticed the other details I had missed in my initial shock. Scattered among the boot prints were small metal objects, half buried in the soil. I knelt down, my hands trembling slightly, and began brushing the dirt away from one of them. The object revealed itself as a tarnished brass button, its surface worn and faded with age. It bore the insignia of a military unit I didn't recognize. 25:42. The button felt wrong in my hand. The metal was cold to the touch, far colder than the surrounding earth, and as I held it, an unsettling sensation crawled up my fingers. It pulsed with an energy that made my fingertips tingle, as if the button had absorbed something it shouldn't have. I held it for a moment longer, but the chill was overwhelming. I placed it aside and continued searching, finding more objects buried among the dirt. A section of rotted fabric, olive drab in color, flaked apart in my fingers as I examined it. It looked like part of a uniform, something worn by a soldier long ago. Next, I found a corroded buckle, likely from military webbing, and beside it, something far stranger, a set of dog tags. They were so weathered, so eroded by time, that the letters were barely legible. 25:56. I squinted at the inscription, my breath catching in my throat as I made out the faded text. PFC 1952. The year was missing, a haunting gap in the metal, as though it had been deliberately erased. The realization struck me like a slap. 1952, the tags had been worn by someone who had been here decades ago, someone who had climbed this same mountain, this same cliff, under circumstances I couldn't even begin to understand. My mind reeled, unable to reconcile the fragments of the past with the strange reality unfolding before me. How had these artifacts ended up here, in the dirt, so far from any known history? And why had they been left behind, preserved in this impossible place? The presence I had felt, the hand on my vest, the footsteps above me, was beginning to make sense in ways I wasn't ready to understand. There was something in this place, something old, something buried beneath the earth, waiting for someone to find it. But why had I been chosen? Why had I been pulled into this forgotten world, this history that hadn't yet ended? 26:08. As I held the dog tags in my hand, the weight of the history they carried settled heavily in my chest. There was a story here, one buried in the very fabric of this mountain. But it was a story I couldn't yet comprehend. And as I stood there, the fog thickening around me, I felt the weight of something far larger than myself. The invitation had not just been a momentary event. It had been a call, a beckoning, and now I was too far in to turn back. 26:30. 1952, 70 years ago. If these items belonged to the owner of the boot prints, then whoever had helped me during my climb had been dead for decades. The thought hit me like a sledgehammer. The impossible had become undeniable. I sat back on my heels, trying to process this revelation, but the ground beneath me seemed to tilt, as if the very earth was conspiring to pull me deeper into this unfathomable mystery. The logical part of my mind, the one that had always prided itself on reason, on rationality, insisted there had to be another explanation. Coincidence? Hallucination? Some trick of adrenaline and altitude that had made me imagine the helping hand? Perhaps my mind had manufactured the assistance I thought I felt, blending reality with fatigue and fear. But the evidence was right there in front of me. The dog tags. The boots. The unmistakable coldness in the air. It was impossible to dismiss. Impossible to rationalize away. 26:50. The wind returned, stronger now, whipping across the summit with a mournful sound that almost sounded like voices. The air turned biting, sharp, and the noise seemed to carry with it a sense of foreboding. It was as if the mountain itself was alive, responding to the discovery I had made, stirring to life after decades of silence. And in that wind, I heard something that made my blood run cold, the soft jingle of military gear, the creak of leather, the measured cadence of boots on stone. The sound was unmistakable. 27:02. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, searching for the source of the noise. There was no one there. The summit remained empty, save for the scattered artifacts and the impossible tracks in the earth. The footprints stretched before me, like an invitation or a warning, one I could neither fully understand nor escape. Yet, despite the emptiness before me, the sensation of being watched had returned, stronger than ever. It wasn't just a passing feeling anymore. It was a presence, real and palpable, as if the very mountain was observing me, waiting for something. 27:16. The temperature began to drop perceptibly. My breath started to mist in the suddenly frigid air, the chill sinking deep into my bones, a sharp contrast to the warmth that had surrounded me just moments before. I could feel it, the oppressive cold that followed the sound of boots. It was as though the presence I felt had physically manifested, wrapping itself around me, making every breath more difficult to take. And then I noticed something more unsettling, the grass around the boot prints began to freeze. Not in the way frost forms on a cold morning, but rapidly, as though the ground itself was responding to the movement, to the presence of something long buried. The blades of grass turned brittle, their tips curling as if touched by ice. My eyes widened in horror as I realized, the presence wasn't just watching. It was drawing nearer, and the mountain was coming alive around me. 27:45. The grass around the boot prints began to glisten with frost, despite the mild weather. The cold, unnatural and sharp, seemed to emanate from the tracks themselves, spreading outward in a slowly expanding circle. The earth cracked and popped as the crystallizing moisture began to form, like the ground itself was reacting to whatever force was making its presence felt. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape the supernatural chill that was seeping into my bones, but I found my retreat blocked by something I couldn't see. The air itself seemed solid, pushing back against me with the same firm pressure I'd felt earlier during my climb. It was as though the very atmosphere around me had become a barrier, holding me in place, refusing to let me move. I was trapped. 27:58. I tried to force my way through it, but it felt like an invisible wall, pressing, unyielding. It wasn't just the cold now, it was something else, something far more unnerving. The sensation was disturbingly familiar, as though I had encountered it before. The feeling of being held in place, confined by an unseen hand, was like the palm I had felt on my vest during the climb, the same firm pressure, the same unexplainable force. But now, it wasn't a hand. It was something much larger, something far more suffocating. 28:12. That's when I saw him. Not clearly, never clearly, but a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. A shadow, stretching and wavering like heat shimmer, neither fully present nor entirely absent. His form was indistinct, blurry around the edges, as though he existed in a space between worlds. He stood at the precise spot where the boot prints had ended. His figure shifted in and out of focus, never staying still, always moving like an incomplete image struggling to solidify. What I could make out suggested a young man in military fatigues, though the details shifted and blurred whenever I tried to focus on them directly. The more I tried to pin him down, the less solid he became. He wasn't just standing there. 28:32. He was watching me. And the realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. He had been watching me all along. Probably long before I'd begun my climb. Measuring me, perhaps, or assessing my worthiness for something I didn't yet understand. His eyes, if they were eyes at all, were hidden in the shifting blur of his form, but I felt them on me, as though they were burning into my soul. I could feel the pressure mounting. This wasn't just a figure I had stumbled upon. He was tied to the mountain, to the impossible tracks, to the cold that surrounded me. He was part of it, and now, so was I. And there, in the suffocating silence, I understood. I wasn't just trapped by the mountain. I was being watched. The mountain wasn't just a place, it was a test, a challenge. And now, I was part of its story, whether I liked it or not. 28:59. Testing my worthiness for some purpose I couldn't begin to fathom. The helping hand during my near fall hadn't been a spontaneous gesture, it had been a calculated intervention. It was the action of a guardian, someone who had decided I deserved to reach the summit alive. But why? What made me special enough to warrant supernatural protection? Or was I simply the latest in a long line of climbers who had received his aid, a roster of names stretching back 70 years to whatever tragedy had first bound him to this desolate place? The questions multiplied in my mind, each one spawning a dozen others, until my thoughts became a chaotic tangle of speculation and growing dread. Every answer seemed to lead to more uncertainty. Why had he chosen to save me? Was this all some twisted ritual that had played out again and again, like an endless loop? And if that were the case, then what was the true purpose of this place? What was the summit really about? 29:12. The questions gnawed at me, digging deeper into my mind, and yet no answers came. I was left to face the impossible reality of the situation alone. This guardian, if that's what he was, had made a decision, but the reasons behind it remained beyond my grasp. If he had been bound to this place for 70 years, then what had kept him here, anchored to the summit? What was he still guarding, still protecting, that would prevent him from moving on, from finding peace? If what I was experiencing was truly the manifestation of a dead soldier's spirit, then what did his continued presence mean? Why hadn't he crossed over, or been freed from his duty? Was this mountain, this cursed, ancient place, somehow holding him captive, just as it had drawn me into its grasp? 29:26. The weight of these thoughts pressed down on me, suffocating me with their urgency. The chill in the air deepened, and I could feel the ground beneath my feet becoming unstable again, as if the very mountain were reacting to my questions, to the realization that I had uncovered more than I had bargained for. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. There was something deeper to this place, something more ancient and more dangerous than I could possibly comprehend. 29:40. The wind died away suddenly, leaving a silence so absolute it felt suffocating. It was as if the world itself had gone still, holding its breath. Even the mountain seemed to pause, its cold weight pressing in on me from all sides. I stood there in that profound silence, the questions swirling in my mind, the feeling of being watched more intense than ever. And that's when I realized, whatever this place was, whatever had happened here, I wasn't meant to understand it. I wasn't meant to leave with answers. But I could feel it, he was still here. And I wasn't alone. 29:60. The silence around me felt complete, so profound that it seemed to press against my eardrums, filling every inch of the air with a suffocating weight. In that absolute quiet, I heard something that nearly stopped my heart. It was the soft whisper of my own name, spoken in a voice that sounded like distant radio static, distorted and broken, as if it had traveled from some far-off place. He knew who I was. Had been waiting specifically for me. 30:16. The realization hit me with such force that my knees buckled, and I almost fell to the ground. This wasn't just some random encounter with a restless spirit, some accident of fate. No. This was a planned meeting, an appointment I had unknowingly kept by choosing to climb Devil's Backbone on this particular day. But planned by whom? And for what purpose? The weight of it settled on me like a stone, cold and heavy, as I tried to make sense of the events that had led me here. I had no answers, only questions that stretched back through the years, into a past I couldn't reach. This was no coincidence. 30:35. The shadow figure moved then, breaking the stillness. He took a single step, one that should have sent him plummeting over the cliff's edge. But instead, the step brought him closer to where I knelt, surrounded by the scattered artifacts. The mist seemed to part around him as he approached, his form solidifying just enough for me to glimpse details that made my heart race. It was him, the same figure I had seen in my mind's eye earlier, the one whose presence had been etched into my subconscious since I first set foot on the trail. But now, I saw him clearly. The same military insignia I had found on the button, the same unit markings that adorned the corroded dog tags, were visible on his fatigues. And then, his face. 30:49. The shifting shadows allowed me to see it clearly for the first time, though it was still blurry around the edges, like an image struggling to remain intact. His face was worn, tired, his features hardened by time and hardship. But there was something else there, something so familiar that it made my breath catch in my throat. His eyes were dark, unblinking, as if he had been waiting for me for far longer than I had realized. They were filled with the same exhaustion I had seen before, but now there was recognition in them, and a deep sadness that made me feel the weight of all the years he had spent trapped here. 30:59. I wanted to turn away, to look anywhere but at him, but I couldn't. It was like being caught in the gaze of something ancient, something that knew more about me than I could ever understand. I knew, in that moment, that I was caught in something that was much bigger than myself, something that had been set into motion long before I ever arrived. And as I knelt there, the fog swirling around us, I knew that my climb had not just been an accident, it had been a part of something far more complicated. I had walked into this place, into this moment, exactly when I was meant to. The question was, what now? 31:01. For just an instant, the figure bore an expression of such profound loneliness that it took my breath away. This wasn't a malevolent spirit, or a vengeful ghost seeking retribution. No. This was a young man, someone who had died far from home, someone who had been standing guard on this remote clifftop for 7 decades. He wasn't haunting this place out of malice. He had been waiting. Waiting for someone who would finally understand what he was trying to protect. Me. 31:15. The knowledge came not as a conscious realization, but as a sudden, inexplicable certainty. It settled into my mind like a key turning in a lock, clear and final. I was the one he had been waiting for, the person who would finally see past the impossible nature of his existence, the one who could pierce the veil of time and understand the deeper truth beneath it all. 31:34. But what was that truth? What secret had been worth a 70-year vigil on this desolate summit? Why had he been trapped here for so long, unable to move on, unable to find peace? The answer, when it came, didn't arrive through words, or visions, or the kind of revelation I had expected. It came through a gradual shift in my perception, as if a fog was slowly lifting from my thoughts, revealing a clarity I hadn't been ready for. 31:52. The artifacts scattered around the boot prints weren't random debris from a long-ago military presence, nor were they just remnants of some forgotten war. No, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, fragments that had been deliberately placed, carefully arranged over decades. These objects, the dog tags, the worn fabric, the buckle, they weren't just relics. They were markers. A story told in pieces, waiting to be understood by someone who could see beyond the surface. And as I stared at them, I felt a strange sense of responsibility, as though my presence here wasn't a mere accident. I wasn't just a visitor to this place, I was part of its history, part of the story that had been unfolding for all these years. 32:04. The artifacts, the dog tags, the boots, and the strange markings, they were breadcrumbs, clues left deliberately for someone with the wisdom to interpret them correctly. The date on the dog tags, 1952. The year the Korean War was raging, when young soldiers disappeared into the mountains and valleys of a foreign land, many never to return. But this wasn't Korea. This was Appalachia. Thousands of miles from any battlefield. So what was a soldier doing here, in this remote corner of the American wilderness? 32:23. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity, and for the first time, I understood. The missing persons reports from the early 1950s. The whispered local legends about government experiments in these hills. The persistent rumors of classified projects that had gone wrong and been hastily covered up. I had dismissed them all as folklore, as the kind of conspiracy theories that flourished in isolated communities with too much time and too few facts. But now, with the weight of this discovery pressing on me, I couldn't ignore them any longer. What if they were true? What if something had happened here in 1952, something so terrible that it had required a cover-up spanning generations? 32:42. What if this young soldier had been assigned to guard the site, to ensure that whatever had been buried here stayed buried forever? His job had been to protect the secret, to keep anyone from uncovering the truth. And now, all these years later, I had stumbled into the very thing he had been tasked with hiding. 32:56. I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat as the implications took shape. The soldier, the government experiments, the cover-up, it was all connected. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just caught in a strange encounter with a restless spirit. I was entangled in something much bigger, something far darker, and I had unknowingly become part of a story that had been unfolding in these hills for decades. The shadow figure nodded slowly, as if confirming my growing understanding. His form was more solid now, more defined, more real than ever before. Solid enough for me to see the details, the faint outline of his fatigues, the military insignia on his shoulder, the wear and tear of someone who had been guarding a secret far too long. 33:09. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of the truth suffocating me. This wasn't just a climb. This wasn't just a ghost or a memory. This was a place of hidden history, a place where something dark had been buried, and the soldier's vigil had never truly ended. He was still guarding it, still watching, still waiting. And now, so was I. 33:26. I could see it now in his stance, the exhaustion. The weight of decades pressing down on his shoulders, a burden that had been steadily accumulating for 70 years. He had been faithfully executing his orders all this time, standing watch over a secret that could never be allowed to surface, guarding something so dangerous that its revelation could shatter everything. But now, I saw something else in him, tiredness, resignation. He had done his duty, and now, after all these years, he was ready to pass on the responsibility to someone else. 33:43. Someone who could carry the burden of knowledge without being crushed by it. Someone who could be trusted to maintain the vigil, even if it meant sacrificing a normal life, even if it meant accepting a truth so dangerous it couldn't be shared with the world. His weary eyes locked with mine, as though he were searching for something within me, something that could carry this weight forward. I wanted to refuse. Every rational instinct screamed at me to reject what I was being asked to accept. This was madness. A truth too heavy, too risky, to be borne by anyone. But deep in my bones, I felt the truth of it. The certainty that some secrets were too important to abandon, too potentially catastrophic to ignore. The weight of the responsibility settled around me, and I knew, without a doubt, that I was already caught in it. 34:00. The realization hit me with cold clarity. I had already made my choice. I had made it the moment I decided to climb this particular cliff, on this particular day. There had been no accident. No chance encounter. It had all led to this moment, this decision, this burden that now rested with me. 34:14. The wind returned then, howling across the summit like distant thunder, but it was fleeting. When it died away again, I was alone. The shadow figure had vanished, no trace of him remained, nothing but the boot prints and the scattered artifacts as proof of our encounter. The silence of the summit seemed to reclaim its former peace, but it was different now. I was different now. His presence was still with me. Not gone, but somehow transferred, integrated into my own awareness like a seed planted deep within me. A part of me now, woven into my thoughts, into my very being. I could feel him, his watchful eyes, his endless vigil. He was still here, and so, I realized, was I, part of the story. Part of the cycle. The burden was mine now, whether I wanted it or not. 34:45. A sense of finality settled within me, as if I were a passenger now, bound for a journey I hadn't chosen but was irrevocably on. I gathered up the artifacts with hands that trembled only slightly, wrapping them carefully in my spare shirt before tucking them into my pack. Evidence of what? I wasn't sure anymore. Evidence of something that couldn't be allowed to surface, something that required a guardian, someone like the soldier, someone willing to spend their life ensuring it stayed hidden. The weight of that responsibility now sat on my shoulders. 35:01. The descent took twice as long as the climb. Not because of physical difficulty, but because I couldn't help myself. I kept stopping, turning back to look at the summit, searching for signs of movement among the sparse trees, hoping to catch another glimpse of the figure who had once been my guide. The wind rustled the branches, and the fog shifted in the distance, but I saw nothing. And yet, I felt watched, observed, but not by hostile eyes. No, this time, it was different. It was as if I were being watched by grateful eyes. Eyes that understood, eyes that had been waiting for me to carry the burden forward. The sensation stayed with me, following me as I descended the mountain, through the forest, and all the way to my car. It didn't leave me, not even when I drove away, down the winding road, away from Devil's Backbone. 35:17. That feeling, of being watched, lingered, and it stayed with me through the long drive home, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. That was 3 months ago. 35:36. Since then, I've returned to Devil's Backbone 17 times. Always alone. Always carrying the artifacts I found on that first visit, carefully wrapped, tucked safely into my pack, a constant reminder of the path I've now taken. I tell people I'm studying local geology, researching erosion patterns for a paper I'll never write. It's a plausible excuse, something grounded in the ordinary. They accept it without question, as they always do. Perhaps they sense the weight in my eyes, the uncertainty that still clings to me, and don't ask further. But I know. I know why I return. I'm not just a curious researcher. I'm bound to this place, to the truth it holds. I'm carrying a legacy now, and whether I wanted it or not, I'm the guardian of it, just as the soldier was before me. 35:54. I've learned things during these visits, fragments of truth that surface in dreams and half-remembered conversations with figures who may or may not exist. People I can't be sure were ever really there, but whose words linger in my mind with disturbing clarity. Something in my manner, in the way I carry myself, discourages further inquiry. No one asks any deeper questions. They sense something about me, something that prevents them from pushing too hard. The soldier's name was David Kowalski. He was 19 years old when he died, guarding something that should never have been created. The project had a designation, Operation Midnight Garden. But there were no official records. The participants were sworn to secrecy under threat of prosecution, and most of them took their knowledge to the grave. But not all. 36:06. Sometimes, late at night, when the summit is shrouded in fog, other figures join me around the weathered boot prints. Old men, mostly. Their faces are marked by decades of carefully guarded secrets, their eyes holding the same distant sorrow I've seen in David's ghostly gaze. They speak in whispers, their voices low and hoarse, as if the very act of speaking could break some unspoken rule. They talk about things that should have stayed buried. Things that shouldn't have been touched. Experiments that pushed beyond the boundaries of human understanding, into territories that were never meant to be explored. They tell me, in the quietest, most haunted words, about the things that happened here, things that have twisted this land into something it should never have become. And they confirm what I've already begun to suspect: my encounter with David Kowalski was only the beginning. 36:24. There are other sites, scattered across these mountains. Other guardians, maintaining their vigils over secrets too dangerous to abandon. A network of watchers, bound together by knowledge and duty, each one chosen not by chance, but by something deeper. Something older than time itself. I'm part of that network now. I didn't choose it, but I can't ignore it. Every time I return, I feel it more acutely, the weight of the responsibility, the truth that has been buried for so long. The soldier's name is now known to me, but that's just one thread in a tangled web of forgotten histories, hidden agendas, and lives left in limbo. 36:41. I know now, beyond doubt, that I am not the first to walk this path, and I won't be the last. The mountain watches, and the soldier's stories continue, stretching back in time and forward, into the unknown. Every step I take, every fragment of truth I uncover, binds me more deeply into this dark legacy. And I understand now that this is my role. Not to leave, but to guard. To remember. To carry the weight of the secrets that have been passed down through the years. 37:11. Somehow, I have been chosen, not for any greatness or strength, but by some quality that makes certain people suitable keepers of truths that could reshape the world or destroy it. I've stopped asking myself whether I'm losing my sanity. The question has become irrelevant, a luxury I can no longer afford. What matters now is the certainty that some things are more important than personal peace of mind. More vital than the comfortable illusion of a world where the impossible doesn't exist. David Kowalski understood that. He spent 70 years proving it, standing vigil over something that could never be allowed to surface. Now, it's my turn. 37:26. The boot prints are still there when I visit the summit. Frozen in the moment of their creation, they remain as a silent testament to the soldier's long watch. But they're fainter now, like the last echoes of a story nearing its end. It feels as though his long vigil is finally coming to a close. Soon, the tracks will fade completely, leaving behind only the knowledge of what lies buried beneath this remote clifftop, and the unwavering certainty that it must never be disturbed. I've made my peace with that responsibility. Some guardians are chosen by circumstance. Others, by fate. A few, like me, are chosen by the grateful dead, those who have waited long enough to pass the torch to someone else, someone who is finally worthy of carrying the burden. 37:41. The question that haunts my dreams isn't whether I'm real or imaginary, sane or psychotic. No, it's simpler, and infinitely more disturbing. If I die tomorrow, who will David Kowalski choose to replace me? And what will it cost them to accept this same burden? 37:54. The thought lingers in the back of my mind, like a shadow that follows me no matter where I go, but I can't focus on it now. There's too much at stake. The responsibility must be passed on, but it's not a legacy anyone can carry lightly. The weight is crushing, and with every visit to the summit, the knowledge deepens, taking root in my soul. This mountain, this place, it changes you. And soon, I will fade into it, just as the figures before me have. I will be part of the mountain's story, a forgotten watcher, waiting for someone else to take the next step. 38:11. Some guardians are chosen by circumstance, others by fate. And then there are those like me, chosen by the Grateful Dead, who can finally rest knowing their duty has been passed to worthy hands. The weight of responsibility grows, and the protagonist now fully understands their role as a guardian of a dark and dangerous secret. The fading boot prints signal the end of David Kowalski's vigil and the beginning of the protagonist's own long watch. The existential questions surrounding their fate and their potential successor create an unnerving sense of inevitability, suggesting that this cycle will continue endlessly, and the protagonist is now part of something far larger than themselves. Story 3. The laughter started 3 weeks after I moved into the house on Elm Street. Every afternoon at exactly 3:47 p.m., like clockwork, the sound would drift over the neighborhood. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, but there was something about it, something that felt wrong. 38:59. The laughter started again, drifting over the weathered brick wall that separated my backyard from the vacant lot next door. It was high-pitched, innocent, the kind of giggling that should have brought comfort, perhaps a feeling of nostalgia. But instead, it sent ice crawling up my spine. Because I knew, absolutely knew, that no children lived there. The realtor had been clear about the neighboring property. It had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades. The lot had once housed the Riverside Children's Home, a place that had been demolished after some scandal in the early 2000s. Now, it was nothing more than overgrown grass, twisted metal foundations, and the skeletal remains of what might have once been playground equipment, faded memories of a place long forgotten, hidden behind that imposing wall topped with rusted barbed wire. 39:18. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just kids from the street sneaking onto the property to play, or maybe the sound was carried from elsewhere, an acoustic trick played by the wind and the strange geography of suburban backyards. It didn't make sense, but I hoped it was something simple, something explainable. But as the days stretched into weeks, the laughter became impossible to dismiss. It wasn't just the timing, the precise 3:47 p.m. arrival every afternoon. It wasn't just the sound itself, high-pitched and innocent. It was something deeper, something unsettling. 39:36. The quality of the sound was what really gnawed at me. Sometimes, it seemed to come from within the walls of the vacant lot itself, as though the ground had become a conduit for it. Other times, it felt as though the laughter was moving, drifting through the air, reaching out toward my house, towards me. It was a sound that felt alive, like it wasn't just an echo from the past, but a presence in the present, insistent, unmistakable, and growing louder with each passing day. I knew something was wrong. The laughter was not natural. It was wrong in a way I couldn't put into words, but I could feel it, deep in my gut. It wasn't just playful, there was something sinister beneath it, something that didn't belong. And it was calling me. 40:10. The laughter always seemed to come from just beyond the wall, so close that I could almost feel the breath on the back of my neck. Other times, it echoed as though it was originating from somewhere deep underground, muffled by earth and time. The sound itself was unsettling, distorting the stillness of the afternoons, but what disturbed me the most was how it never lasted long enough for me to pinpoint its source. Just when I'd grab my phone to record it or step closer to the wall to investigate, the laughter would fade like smoke, dissolving into the air, leaving only the ordinary sounds of the world around me, distant traffic, a neighbor's lawn mower, the whistle of wind through the oak trees. 40:23. It was as if the laughter itself existed only to taunt me, to make me question my own senses. The mystery grew more frustrating by the day. The sound would never linger, never give me a chance to truly understand it. It was fleeting, elusive, like an illusion that vanished the moment you reached for it. 40:36. By the 4th week, I had developed an uncomfortable routine. Every day at 3:45 p.m., I would find myself gravitating toward the kitchen window, the one that offered the best view of my backyard and the wall beyond. It was as if some invisible force was pulling me toward it, like a moth to a flame. I'd stand there, coffee mug in hand, watching and waiting, like some suburban sentinel on guard, anticipating the return of that laugh. My work-from-home schedule made this obsession easier to maintain, and I told myself it was just curiosity, nothing more. A minor mystery to solve, an oddity to investigate. But deep down, I knew it was becoming more than that. It was consuming me, this fascination, this growing need to uncover the truth behind the laughter that seemed to beckon me. 40:56. The afternoon I decided to investigate further was unseasonably warm for October. The kind of warmth that felt out of place, as though the weather itself was preparing for something strange. I had been working on a particularly frustrating coding project, and the constant loop of dead ends had left me feeling agitated. The laughter was becoming a distraction I could no longer ignore. So, I made a decision. I would go to the wall. I would find the source of the sound once and for all. 42:27. I took a few hesitant steps toward the vacant lot, drawn by an impulse I couldn't resist. As I neared the area beyond the weathered wall, I saw them, rectangular depressions in the ground, arranged in neat rows like a garden plot. But these weren't flower beds. The proportions, the methodical spacing, the way the earth seemed to have settled over time, they looked like graves. Small graves. 42:46. Leading between them, pressed deep into the soft October soil, were footprints. Child-sized footprints, bare feet, with distinct toe impressions. They weaved between the rectangular depressions in a seemingly random pattern, as if whoever had made them had been playing some invisible game of hopscotch, stepping carefully between the settled earth. I felt a sharp jolt of panic, and my heart hammered against my ribs as I jerked back from the gap in the ground. The laughter, which had been so familiar, had stopped. In its place came a silence so complete it felt intentional, like the world itself was holding its breath. It was suffocating. 43:04. I stood frozen on unsteady legs, brushing dirt from my knees, trying to process what I had just seen. I couldn't make sense of it. The depressions, they couldn't be graves. The city would never allow something like that. It was impossible. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was old foundation work, or drainage issues, or... But even as I ran through possibilities in my mind, I knew I was lying to myself. The spacing was too deliberate, too uniform. The footprints, so fresh, so real, remained a haunting imprint in my mind. There was no logical explanation. Not for this. 43:42. The footprints, fresh, so fresh, they still held the perfect detail of small toes and instep arches, as if the child who made them had just passed through moments ago. The sight of them sent a wave of nausea through me, the evidence so real, so undeniable. I stood there for a long time, frozen, unable to move, the air around me thick with the weight of something unspoken. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching the Riverside Children's Home, trying to make sense of what I had stumbled upon. What I found in the old newspaper archives made my coffee go cold and my stomach turn. 43:58. The facility had been shut down in 2003, following an investigation into irregularities in record-keeping and resident care. The articles were vague, wrapped in the careful language of legal liability, but reading between the lines painted a disturbing picture. Children had gone missing from the home over the years, their disappearances explained away as runaways or transfers to other facilities. But the records were incomplete, contradictory. Some children seemed to have simply vanished from all official documentation, as if they'd never existed in the first place. 44:16. The most chilling detail came from a former employee who spoke anonymously to a local reporter. They said, the children who got sick went to the infirmary. But there was no infirmary. Just the cellar. And that back garden where no one was supposed to go. I read those words over and over, my pulse quickening as the pieces of a horrible puzzle began to fall into place. I had seen that garden, or what was left of it, the twisted remnants of playground equipment, the overgrown grass, the vacant lot behind the wall. And I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever had happened there, whatever had been hidden, was far worse than I had imagined. 44:30. I closed my laptop as the sun began to set, my hands trembling slightly. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, the shadows stretching long across the yard. It was as if the world itself was slowing down, holding its breath. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of the mystery that had been unfolding around me. It wasn't just laughter in the wind. It was a story, their story, that had been waiting to be uncovered. A story that was darker than anything I could have anticipated. And I was now part of it. 44:49. It was that gray hour between day and night, when shadows grow long and familiar things take on sinister shapes. I found myself avoiding the kitchen window, unwilling to look at the wall, the yard, anything that might pull me back into the dark, creeping reality I had uncovered. But eventually, hunger drove me to the refrigerator. That was when I saw them again. More footprints. This time, in my own backyard. 45:09. They started at the wall, the same wall that separated my property from the vacant lot next door, and walked directly toward my house. The small, bare footprints were pressed deeply into the soft earth around my flower beds. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. These were the same size as the ones I had found in the vacant lot, and they were just as fresh, just as real. The question that gnawed at my mind was how they had gotten here, how they had scaled an 8-foot wall topped with barbed wire without making a sound, without disturbing anything around them. They had landed silently in my yard and, without hesitation, approached my home while I sat unaware at my desk. 45:21. But here's what made my skin crawl. The footprints ended exactly 6 feet from my back door. They didn't circle the house or return to the wall. They didn't move off in any direction. They simply stopped, as if the person who had made them had evaporated into the evening air, vanishing into the shadows. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I stood there, flashlight in hand, staring at the spot where the tracks ended. It didn't make sense. There was no logical explanation. No one could have vanished like that, especially not someone who had made such clear, undeniable marks in the earth. 45:35. I grabbed the flashlight and examined the tracks more closely, my breath catching in my throat. The impressions were deep, detailed, unmistakably real. They weren't an illusion, a trick of the light or my tired mind. The more I followed them from the wall toward my house, the more something impossible became apparent. With each step closer to my back door, I realized that the footprints didn't show signs of wear, of movement. They were perfectly intact. As if they had appeared out of nowhere, unmarked by time, untouched by anything that might have disturbed them in the world beyond. And with that realization, a chill swept through me, colder than the air outside. 45:56. When I reached the back door, I could see that the footprints had grown fainter. By the time they reached that 6-foot mark, they were barely visible, just faint depressions in the soil, so subtle that I questioned if I had really seen them at all. Beyond that point, there was nothing. Not even disturbed grass, not a sign of any footstep. Standing there in my backyard with a flashlight in my shaking hand, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me. The sensation was so strong that I spun around, sweeping the beam across my yard, across the wall, across the dark windows of my house. But the beam illuminated nothing. Yet, the feeling persisted, an unsettling certainty that I was being watched. Watched from multiple directions at once. 46:15. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. I leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to steady my breath, but the unease wouldn't leave. It felt like the house itself was pressing in on me, the walls closing in. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. The house settling, the branches scraping against the roof, the distant hum of the refrigerator, all familiar noises, but they felt different. They felt off. Underneath those normal sounds, I kept hearing something else, soft footsteps on hardwood floors. The quiet creak of stairs. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there. I tried to tell myself it was just the old house adjusting to the October cold. But my overworked mind, frayed and on edge, kept interpreting it differently. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was moving through the rooms below. 46:42. The fear kept me awake, my mind spiraling through endless scenarios of what could be happening. The next morning, I called the city planning office. 47:09. I needed to know about the lot next door. I needed official confirmation of what I had seen. The clerk who answered was helpful, but puzzled by my questions about the former children's home, Riverside Children's Home. She paused for a moment, and I could hear the sound of typing on the other end of the line. "I'm not showing any record of that facility in our database." "What address are you looking at?" she asked. I gave her the street address, described the location, and mentioned the vacant lot. More typing, followed by longer pauses. "Sir, according to our records, that lot has been vacant since 1987. It was rezoned for residential development but never built on due to soil conditions. There's no record of any institutional use." 47:24. I hung up the phone, sitting in silence for a few moments as I stared at my laptop screen. The newspaper articles I had found the night before seemed less reliable now, their details fuzzy in the harsh light of morning. Had I really read about missing children, about basement burials? Or had my tired mind filled in blanks with its own fears? But the footprints were real. I had checked them again that morning, and they were still there, still ending at that impossible 6-foot mark. I couldn't explain them away, no matter how hard I tried. They were as real as the ground beneath my feet. 47:45. The laughter came again at exactly 3:47 p.m., and this time, I was ready. I had my phone set to record, my shoes by the back door, a plan to document whatever was happening next door. My heart was pounding as the seconds ticked away. But when the sound began, I found myself frozen at the kitchen window, unable to move. The sound was still there, still soft, still childlike, but this time, it was different. This time, I could see it. 48:04. I saw the movement in the yard, small, fleeting, barely perceptible at first. A shadow darted across the edge of my vision, followed by another. I had seen enough to know what I was looking at. Children's figures, there, on the other side of the wall, playing in the overgrown lot, just out of sight. Their shapes were too fast, too erratic, to fully make sense of, but the laughter, they were real. I could hear their voices now, close, too close. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was no longer just a sound or a memory. The children, the laughter, the footprints, they were all part of something I hadn't yet understood. And now I was trapped in it. 48:39. Through the gap in the wall, barely visible in the afternoon shadows, shapes moved, small figures, translucent as heat shimmer, playing some silent game between the rectangular depressions in the earth. The laughter came with them, a soft, impossible sound, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They ran and darted between the settled graves, their movements quick and erratic. But the strange thing was, there was no sound. The laughter filled the air, but their feet made no noise as they passed, no rustling in the grass, nothing but the eerie sound that seemed to permeate the space around me. It was as if they were shadows, not really present, but still there, moving in ways that defied all logic. I watched, phone forgotten in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest, as one of the figures approached the wall. 48:55. It was child-sized, wearing what might have been old-fashioned clothing, a simple dress or shirt that moved without wind. As it drew closer to the gap where I crouched, watching, the details of its form became clearer. But not the details I expected. The figure had no face. Where features should have been, eyes, nose, mouth, there was only smooth, blank space, like an unfinished sculpture, a canvas that had never been given shape. Yet, somehow, I knew. I knew it was looking at me, studying me with that featureless visage, tilted in curious observation. 49:07. We regarded each other through the gap in the wall, the living and the what? Ghost? Hallucination? I couldn't decide. The second stretched out impossibly long, as though time itself had slowed, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I had crossed into a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. What was I seeing? Was it really happening? Or had my mind fractured under the weight of everything I had already discovered? I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. 49:48. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it, as it raised one small hand and pressed it against the wall, directly over the gap. The sudden chill that followed was like a punch to the chest. My breath misted in the warm October air, and frost began forming on the mortar around the opening, creeping like a slow, creeping sickness. I stumbled backward, my heart thundering in my ears. My phone finally slipped from numb fingers and crashed to the patio stones, the screen shattering into pieces with a sound that seemed to reverberate in the silence. 50:01. The laughter stopped. Just like that. It was gone, replaced by a silence so profound it made my ears ring, a dead quiet that pressed in on me like the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. But in that silence, I heard something else, a soft, scraping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, or the house settling. But no, it was something much more unsettling, scratching. It was faint at first, like fingernails dragging across stone, but it was unmistakable. The sound was coming from inside my house. The realization hit me like a physical blow. 50:15. I turned toward the back door, and that's when I saw them. Pressed against the glass were small handprints, dozens of them. Overlapping, fresh, as if a crowd of children had been trying to get inside while I stood distracted in the yard. The prints covered the glass from top to bottom, some so high they could only have been made by someone floating in the air. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at them, the horror sinking in with every passing second. 50:38. But here's the most chilling part, I was looking at them from the outside. The handprints were on the interior surface of the glass. Whatever had made them was already inside my house. 50:50. The scratching continued, relentless. It sounded like it was getting closer, like whatever was inside was moving, scraping against the walls, against the floors. The sound was maddening, like the slow, steady rhythm of something waiting to break through. I wasn't alone. I could feel it now, they were inside. And whatever they were, whatever had been waiting in the shadows, it was about to make itself known. 51:02. The scratching was like chalk on a blackboard, a sound so grating it made my teeth ache. It seemed to move through the house, traveling from room to room with deliberate purpose, like someone, or something, was making its way slowly but methodically toward me. I followed the sound with my eyes, tracking its progress through my living room, up the stairs, and finally into my bedroom. My bedroom. The one room where I had left my laptop open, displaying all my research about the Riverside Children's Home. Research that, according to the city clerk, documented a facility that had never existed. A place that, according to every official record, had never been real. 51:15. Standing in my backyard, as the October afternoon faded toward evening, I faced a choice that no rational person should have to make. I could go inside and confront whatever was making those sounds, whatever was moving through my house like a phantom. Or I could run, leave everything behind and flee from a house that had somehow become infected with impossibilities, with things I couldn't explain and didn't understand. But as I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, weighing my options, something caught my eye. Something that made the choice for me. 51:35. The footprints in my yard, the ones that had ended 6 feet from my back door, were moving. New impressions appeared in the soft earth, one after another, each step pressing deeper into the soil. Invisible feet were walking across my lawn, drawing closer to where I stood, helpless and frozen. 51:49. The footsteps were approaching, coming toward me with measured, inevitable progress. It was too much to process. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I only knew one thing: I had to get inside. I ran for the back door, my keys fumbling in my shaking hands. The noise behind me, those invisible feet, that scratching sound, was getting closer. With every step I took, I could feel the presence, closing in on me, suffocating me with its relentless approach. When I finally got the door open and stumbled inside, I slammed it shut behind me with a force that echoed through the house. My heart pounded in my chest, but I knew it wasn't over. Whatever had been outside, whatever had been following me, was now inside. 52:22. I could have sworn I felt cold breath on the back of my neck. The scratching sound had stopped, but the house felt different now, charged with an energy that made the air thick and hard to breathe. Every shadow seemed deeper, every corner potentially occupied by something unseen. It was as though the very fabric of my home had shifted, warped by whatever had been following me. I moved through my own house like a stranger, touching things that should have felt familiar. The rooms I'd known for months now seemed foreign, almost hostile, despite containing my own furniture, my own belongings. In my bedroom, my laptop screen glowed with the same newspaper articles I had been reading earlier, but something was wrong. The text had changed. 52:38. Where I remembered reading about missing children and suspicious deaths, now there were only innocent stories about a successful youth facility that had closed due to funding issues. The anonymous employee quote about the cellar and the back garden was gone, replaced by a glowing testimonial from a grateful former resident. My pulse quickened. I refreshed the page, hoping the discrepancy would disappear. But it didn't. The articles changed again, this time describing Riverside Children's Home as a model facility, one that had never experienced any problems whatsoever. 53:06. I couldn't believe my eyes. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest. I refreshed the page again. This time, a completely different story appeared. It was a brief mention of a children's home that had been destroyed in a fire, with all residents safely evacuated. The absurdity of it hit me like a slap. No, this isn't right. 53:20. Each time I reloaded the page, the story changed, altering, shifting, as if the past itself was being rewritten in real time. What had I stumbled into? What was happening here? The articles that had once confirmed everything I had discovered, the missing children, the disturbing whispers, now denied it all. The more I tried to grasp the truth, the further it slipped from my fingers, like sand through an open hand. I couldn't keep up. The evidence, the memories, all of it, was it real? Was it me, or had everything I uncovered been erased, overwritten, altered somehow by forces I couldn't even begin to understand? 53:34. The history had changed. The only constant was the facility's existence and its location on the lot next door. But the details, the dark rumors, the missing children, the implications of improper burials, shifted like sand, impossible to pin down or verify. The more I tried to grasp it, the more elusive it became, like an itch I couldn't reach. Every time I thought I had a hold on something, it slipped away, replaced with new information that contradicted everything I had previously uncovered. I closed the laptop with shaking hands, my breath quickening as panic began to set in. I tried to think rationally. Stress could cause hallucinations. Lack of sleep could distort perception. Maybe I'd been working too hard, spending too much time alone, allowing my imagination to transform normal neighborhood sounds into something sinister. 53:54. But then, I heard the laughter again. This time, it came from inside the house, from upstairs. From my own bedroom, where I had just been sitting. The sound drifted down the stairs, like cold air, filling the space around me with that same innocent giggling that had started it all. But now, it was different. Now, it was accompanied by other sounds. 54:07. The soft patter of feet on hardwood. The quiet creak of floorboards adjusting to small weights. The unmistakable sound of movement, of something, someone, walking through my house. I stood frozen in my living room, my heart racing in my chest as I listened to the invisible children playing in the rooms above my head. The laughter, the footsteps, they felt too real, too close. I could almost hear them moving from room to room, their play echoing through the house like it belonged to them. 54:21. The footsteps moved with purpose, as if exploring every corner of my home, mapping its layout for some unknown reason. Occasionally, I heard a faint giggle, the sound rising and falling, as if they were talking to each other, or to something I couldn't see. But what chilled me the most was the sensation that they knew exactly where I was. They were searching for something. Or maybe, they were waiting for something. 54:49. There were whispers, what might have been whispered voices, too soft to understand, but clearly communicating in the universal language of childhood games. The laughter, the faint patter of feet, the distant giggles, all of it seemed to carry an invisible, playful energy. But the rational part of my mind desperately tried to explain it away. Maybe it was carbon monoxide poisoning or a gas leak, something environmental that could cause auditory hallucinations. But when I checked the detectors, they showed normal readings. My phone worked perfectly fine when I tried to call for help. Yet, how do you explain to emergency services that your house has been invaded by the ghosts of children who may or may not have ever existed? How do you put that into words without sounding completely insane? 55:02. The silence in the house seemed to mock me, and I stood there, phone in hand, my mind desperately searching for some rational explanation, some way to make sense of this nightmare. But nothing made sense. As the sun set completely, plunging my neighborhood into the deep darkness of an October evening, the sounds upstairs grew more active. It was as if the approaching night gave them strength, permission to be more present in my world. The noises, once faint, now became more distinct, more purposeful. 55:16. I heard what sounded like furniture being moved. Drawers opening and closing, the soft thud of small feet jumping from bed to floor, followed by a scuffling sound as if something, or someone, was rummaging through my belongings. But when I climbed the stairs to investigate, my heart racing in my chest, I found my bedroom exactly as I'd left it. The bed was made, my laptop closed, everything in its proper place, nothing had been disturbed. 55:34. The only difference was the temperature. It was noticeably colder upstairs, cold enough that my breath formed small clouds in the air. And on my pillow, pressed deep into the fabric, were fresh indentations, small, child-sized impressions, as if someone had been lying there, their presence leaving behind a trace, an echo. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. The cold was unmistakable. They had been there. I could feel it, as sure as I felt the temperature difference on my skin. The house was no longer just a home, it was a place of ghosts, of memories that didn't belong to me but that I couldn't escape. 56:08. The impressions on the pillow were unmistakable, deep and clear, as if someone had been sleeping there. There was the distinct outline of a small head, pressed into the fabric. I backed out of the room, a cold sweat rising on the back of my neck, and spent the rest of the night downstairs, dozing fitfully in my recliner. Every light in the house was blazing, as though I could somehow push back the darkness by sheer force of will. But the sounds continued through the night, footsteps, laughter, the occasional creak of a door opening somewhere in the shadows. But I didn't investigate. I had learned that looking for the source of these manifestations only raised more questions I couldn't answer. The more I searched, the more I found, and none of it made sense. 56:21. By morning, exhaustion had dulled my fear into a kind of resigned acceptance. Whatever was happening in my house, whatever presence had followed me home from that gap in the wall, it didn't seem malevolent. Disturbing, yes. Impossible to explain, certainly. But not actively threatening. At least not yet. I made coffee and stood at my kitchen window, staring out at the backyard where all of this had begun. The footprints were still there, but they had multiplied overnight. Dozens of small impressions now covered my lawn, creating intricate patterns that looked almost like crop circles. They wound around my flower beds, spiraled near the tool shed, and created what might have been hopscotch squares near the back fence. 56:40. And they all led to the wall. I watched, my hands trembling slightly as I sipped my coffee, the bitter taste filling my mouth like ashes. The footprints were still fresh, still visible in the soft earth. But something new was happening. 56:59. As I stood there, unable to look away, I saw new footprints appearing in the soft earth, as if they were being created by invisible feet. The impressions formed slowly, deliberately, one after another, a path stretching out before me. I wasn't imagining it. I could see it, small, child-sized footprints, as real as the grass beneath my feet, emerging from nowhere and leading to the wall, as if the children were still playing, still moving through the world I thought I understood. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the mystery wasn't over. It was just beginning. 57:34. The figures moved in slow circles around my yard, as if they were mapping territory or marking boundaries. The laughter began again at exactly 3:47 p.m., but this time, I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting it, waiting for it, almost welcoming it, as the only predictable element in a situation that had spiraled far beyond my understanding. I had grown numb to the terror. The mystery was no longer just something to fear. It had become a part of my life, something I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I wished I could. 57:47. I walked outside and approached the wall. No longer caring about rational explanations or logical outcomes, I stepped closer to the edge of the unknown. The need to understand had eclipsed any fear that still lingered. I pressed my hand against the weathered bricks and looked through the gap. Through the small opening, I could see them more clearly now, dozens of small figures, moving through the overgrown lot, playing among the rectangular depressions in the earth. The depressions, I now realized, might or might not be graves, but they felt connected to something much older than the ground they were buried in. 58:02. Some of the figures wore old-fashioned clothing, others seemed to be dressed in more modern garments, as if they represented different eras of the facility's existence, each piece of clothing a relic from the past that was slowly fading into the present. They all had the same blank, featureless faces, the absence of expression unsettling and unnatural. But despite the lack of detail in their features, I could sense their emotions. I felt their joy, their curiosity, a kind of innocent playfulness that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. 58:20. It was as though they were children lost in time, spirits caught between worlds. They seemed aware of my presence, but not threatened by it. If anything, they appeared to be trying to communicate with me. They gestured toward the settled earth beneath their feet and then pointed toward my house. Their movements were deliberate, as if they were trying to show me something, to make me understand what I had yet to see. One of them approached the wall and knelt beside the gap where I watched. It pressed its face close to the opening, as if to peer into my world from the other side. 58:39. I felt my breath catch in my throat, as though the proximity of its presence had somehow crossed the line between the living and the dead. The figure stared at me, its blank face impossibly close to mine. And for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in its eyes, something like recognition, a connection that transcended time. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. The presence was still there, but the figure had melted back into the shadows, leaving me once again alone with the earth and the silence of the lot. 58:51. The figure's face pressed closer to the gap, and I found myself staring into that smooth, empty visage from just inches away. For a moment, one that seemed to stretch into eternity, we studied each other across the boundary between whatever world they inhabited and the one I thought I knew. I could feel the weight of its gaze, even though there were no eyes, no features to define it. It was as if the figure was looking straight into my soul, probing the depths of my being. Then, it spoke. Not with words. 59:03. The voice came directly into my mind, as clear as my own thoughts, but unmistakably foreign, distant and hollow, yet somehow intimately present. We've been waiting. The simple statement hit me like a physical blow, sending a shockwave through my chest. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over my own feet in my haste to escape that impossible communication. But the voice followed me, echoing in my skull with patient persistence, as though it could not be ignored. 59:24. We've been waiting so long. But now you can see us. Now you can help. I ran toward my house, panic flooding my veins, but the voice continued. It grew stronger rather than fading with distance, as though the distance meant nothing to it. The others didn't understand. They moved away. Or they ignored us. Or they convinced themselves we weren't real. But you kept looking. You kept listening. You're different. 59:40. I slammed the back door behind me and pressed my back against it, desperate to block out the voice, but there was no escaping it. The words came from inside my mind, seeping into my thoughts, filling every corner of my consciousness. They had become a part of me, echoing louder with each passing second. We need someone to remember. Someone to know what happened here. The truth gets lost. The records change. But the earth remembers. The ground holds our stories. 60:15. My living room felt like a foreign country now, familiar objects made strange by the presence of thoughts that weren't my own. I stumbled to my laptop and opened it, desperate to document what was happening before I lost my grip on reality completely. But the screen showed only a blank document. Whatever I typed disappeared as soon as I lifted my fingers from the keys, as if the words themselves were being erased by some invisible force. I couldn't make sense of it. It was like the world itself was rejecting my attempts to anchor it to anything concrete. 60:28. And then I heard it again, the voice, soft, insistent, pulling at me. Not that way. Come back outside. Come and see. 60:47. Against every instinct, every reasonable thought in my mind, I found myself walking back toward the door. The pull was gentle but irresistible, like being led by a trusted friend into unknown territory. It felt like a call I couldn't ignore, a promise that there was something waiting for me that I had to see, no matter the cost. The afternoon was fading toward evening again, and the air felt thicker, heavier with something unseen. 61:01. As I stepped outside, I could feel it, the change. The lot next door looked different. The overgrown grass had taken on an ethereal quality, as if it were glowing with its own soft, internal light. The figures, too, were different. They were more solid now, more present, moving among the rectangular depressions with a weight that hadn't been there before. They weren't shadows or fleeting illusions anymore. They were there, as real and tangible as anything in the world I knew. 61:15. I approached the wall and knelt down, my heart racing. The gap in the bricks was still there, waiting for me, a silent invitation into the world beyond. And as I gazed through it, the figures seemed to notice me, turning toward me with a sense of recognition. 61:20. Beside the gap, on the other side of the wall, a small figure waited for me. Its blank face conveyed something I couldn't understand, infinite patience, as if it had been waiting for years, centuries even, for this moment to come. Look, it said, its voice barely more than a whisper, yet somehow impossible to ignore. It pointed toward the settled earth beneath its feet. As I watched, the rectangular depressions in the soil began to change. The earth shifted and settled, revealing outlines that were unmistakably human, child-sized forms pressed into the soil, preserved like fossils in stone. But these weren't just impressions. 61:36. These were monuments. Each depression marked a life that had been forgotten by official records, but remembered by the ground itself. Forgotten by everyone except the earth, the only witness to what had truly happened here. 61:50. 37, the voice said. 37 children. 37 children who were never reported missing because we were already missing. Already forgotten. Already invisible. The weight of those words slammed into me, as though they had physically struck me in the chest. The truth hit me with such force that I staggered, dizzy with the implications. The Riverside Children's Home hadn't just closed due to scandal or poor management. 62:09. It had been erasing inconvenient residents for years, children who had no families to miss them, no advocates to ask questions, no one to notice when they simply disappeared from all records. The lies that had covered up their disappearances were woven into the very fabric of the system that was supposed to protect them. They told us we were going to new homes, the voice continued, a haunting, hollow echo. Better places. Families who wanted us. But we never left this yard. We're still here. Still waiting for. 62:41. Someone to remember our names, the voice pleaded, the desperation seeping through the words. I found my own voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. What do you want from me? I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Tell them. Tell everyone. Make them remember that we existed. That we mattered. The weight of those words pressed down on me, suffocating and profound. I felt a burning need to answer, to somehow make good on this impossible request. But how could I? 63:04. As the sun set completely, the lot next door transformed before my eyes. The overgrown grass became a well-maintained garden, neat and carefully tended, like a place of reverence. The twisted metal foundations became the walls of a large institutional building, its darkened windows reflecting the fading light. In that moment, I could see it clearly, the Riverside Children's Home, as it had been in its final years. A place where unwanted children disappeared into unmarked graves in the backyard. Where lives had been systematically erased, hidden behind a wall of lies and neglect. 63:16. But this vision lasted only moments. As full darkness settled over the neighborhood, the lot returned to its current state of abandonment. The building faded like smoke, dissipating into the air, leaving only the rectangular depressions in the earth and the small figures who tended them like gardeners, caring for a sacred space that no one else could see. 63:29. Will you help us? The voice asked again, and this time I could hear the hope in it, the desperate need for acknowledgement that only the living could provide. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to do. Or how I could possibly fulfill such a promise. 63:43. How do you prove the existence of children who have been systematically erased from all official records? How do you document a truth that had been buried so deep, so carefully concealed, that it seemed impossible to uncover? I didn't know. But I understood one thing, I had to try. 63:55. The truth changes every time you try to capture it. It slips away like water through your fingers, constantly shifting and morphing, refusing to be pinned down. But as I knelt by the wall in my backyard, surrounded by footprints that appeared and disappeared like signatures written in water, I knew I would try. Not because I fully understood what was happening to me, or because I could prove any of it to the outside world. But because 37 forgotten children deserved to have their stories remembered. 64:08. The laughter began again, but this time it sounded different. Less desperate, more hopeful. As if, after decades of trying to get someone's attention, they had finally found a person willing to listen. 64:22. I stay in the house now, though my friends think I've lost my mind. They point to the empty lot next door, to the city records that show no children's home ever existed here, to my inability to provide any concrete evidence of what I've experienced. They suggest therapy, medication, a change of scenery. But every afternoon at 3:47, I know the truth. 64:40. I see the children playing among their forgotten graves, and I hear their stories in the wind that carries their laughter over the wall. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear them moving through my house like honored guests. No longer desperate to be noticed, but content to simply be remembered. 64:54. The footprints appear and disappear in my yard, spelling out names in the soft earth, names that fade before I can photograph them. But I write them down carefully in a notebook that stays hidden from visitors. 37 names of children who existed, who mattered, who deserved better than to be erased from history by those who were supposed to protect them. 65:07. I don't know if I'm documenting the truth, or chronicling my own descent into madness. The evidence changes. The records shift, and the truth I thought I knew slips further away. But I will keep writing. I will keep remembering. Even if the world refuses to see them. Even if I can't make anyone else understand. 65:42. The footprints vanish whenever anyone else is watching. But in the growing darkness of each October evening, when the laughter drifts over the wall and the small figures tend their garden of memories, I know that some truths are too important to depend on proof. They're still here. Still waiting. Still hoping that someone will remember. And as long as I remain in this house, someone will. Story 4. 66:14. The silence should have been my first warning. I had been hiking the Appalachian backwoods for 15 years, and I knew the natural rhythm of these mountains, the constant whisper of wind through leaves, the distant call of hawks, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. But here, following what my GPS insisted was a legitimate trail along this dried riverbed, the world had gone unnaturally quiet. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, as if the very air had thickened around me. 66:27. The riverbed stretched ahead, like a scar through the landscape, its exposed stones bleached white by decades of flash floods and scorching summers. Ancient oaks and maples towered on either side, their canopies so dense that only fractured beams of late afternoon sunlight managed to penetrate the gloom. I had chosen this route specifically for its isolation, a chance to disconnect from the digital chaos that had been consuming my life back in the city. 66:45. Now, 3 hours into my solitary trek, I was beginning to question that decision. My boots crunched against the dried sediment, each step releasing small puffs of dust that seemed to hang in the still air longer than physics should allow. The GPS on my phone showed I was following a legitimate hiking path, but the trail markers had vanished somewhere back near the ridge, and I was beginning to suspect I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. 66:57. The rational part of my mind insisted I should double back. But something deeper, some primal instinct, urged me to press forward, to continue down the path, despite the growing sense that something wasn't right. The silence felt oppressive, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. 67:36. There was an instinct I couldn't quite name that urged me forward. That's when I heard the first crack. It came from somewhere ahead and to my left, a sharp, sudden report that echoed off the riverbank walls like a gunshot. My body froze, and my mind raced as I scanned the tree line. But there was nothing unusual. Just the towering sentinels of oak and maple, their trunks disappearing into the shadowy canopy above. After a long moment, I convinced myself it had been nothing more than a dead branch finally surrendering to gravity, a common enough sound in these old forests. I continued walking, trying to shake off the unease creeping through me. But now, my senses were heightened, every nerve ending alert for danger. The silence pressed against my eardrums with an almost physical weight, broken only by the soft whisper of my breathing and the rhythmic crunch of my footsteps. 68:13. Then I heard it again, another crack. This one was closer, unmistakably deliberate. It wasn't the random snap of a falling branch but something with purpose behind it. My pace quickened involuntarily, though I tried to maintain the appearance of casual hiking. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder, but the riverbed behind me remained empty, stretching back into the gathering gloom like a tunnel carved from the earth itself. The afternoon sun was sinking faster than I had anticipated, and the shadows were beginning to pool in the deeper recesses of the forest. My mind raced with every step, but my body responded on instinct. Something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I was no longer alone in this silent forest. 68:59. Then the third crack came. This one, I could feel in my bones. It was directly overhead. I looked up just in time to see a massive oak, easily 100 feet tall and thick as a dining room table, begin its descent toward the riverbed. There was no wind, no obvious reason for its fall. Yet down it came, gathering momentum with each passing second, its ancient trunk groaning like a wounded beast. 69:16. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself sideways, rolling across the rocky ground, desperate to avoid the falling giant. The massive oak crashed down exactly where I'd been standing moments before, the sound of its impact shaking the very earth beneath me. The air was thick with dust and the smell of crushed leaves as I lay there, breathless, heart pounding in my chest. I scrambled to my feet, eyes wide with disbelief. My heart raced, still thumping in my throat as I turned to look at the fallen tree, the jagged break in its trunk like the remnants of a fallen titan. But what had caused it? There was no storm, no wind. It had fallen for no reason, other than the feeling that something unseen had guided it down, something far more dangerous than the natural world around me. 69:30. Before I could fully comprehend what had just happened, the impact of the fallen tree shook the earth beneath me, sending up a cloud of dust and debris that stung my eyes and filled my lungs with the sharp, acrid taste of disturbed soil. I gasped, trying to clear my lungs, but the air was thick with the choking dust. As the cloud settled and the silence returned, I stared at the fallen giant in disbelief. The trunk had been severed cleanly at its base, as if cut by some enormous invisible blade. The stump that remained showed no signs of disease or rot, no weakening from age or weathering. It was just healthy, living wood, and yet, it had somehow chosen this precise moment to surrender to gravity. It was as though the tree had been forced down, rather than simply falling due to natural causes. 69:47. I scrambled to my feet, brushing dirt from my jacket, my thoughts a whirl of confusion and dread. That's when the fourth crack split the air. This time, I was watching as it happened. Another oak, this one perhaps 50 yards downstream, simply toppled without warning. No wind, no visible cause, just a sudden, deliberate collapse that sent birds, which I hadn't even realized were there, exploding from the canopy in a panic of wings and terrified cries. The sound of their departure was the first break in the oppressive silence I had heard since entering this cursed stretch of riverbed. The birds' chaotic flight was jarring, sharp against the backdrop of stillness. 70:05. My rational mind scrambled for explanations: drought conditions, weakening root systems, underground erosion from forgotten springs, maybe even some kind of boring beetle infestation that had hollowed out the trunks from within. But even as I catalogued these possibilities, a deeper part of my consciousness was already rejecting them. This wasn't natural. This was deliberate. 70:18. The fifth tree fell behind me, cutting off my retreat. I spun around, my heart skipping a beat, to see another massive trunk blocking the path I had just traveled. Its fall was perfectly timed, trapping me in this narrow section of the riverbed. The precision was impossible to ignore now. Each tree had fallen with surgical accuracy, creating barriers that funneled me forward, like some kind of elaborate maze. Whatever was causing this, whatever unseen force was guiding it, it wanted me to continue deeper into the forest. 71:03. My heart was hammering against my ribs now, and a cold sweat had broken out across my forehead, despite the warm afternoon air. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but the trees had already locked me in. I was being pushed, cornered, forced into the very heart of the forest. I pulled out my phone, desperate for some kind of communication, some way to reach out for help. But the screen remained dark. No service. I tried again, tapping at the device, feeling the rising panic as the weight of isolation settled over me. 71:34. The comfort of connectivity was a distant memory as I stared at my phone. The screen showed no signal. Not unusual in these remote areas, but deeply unsettling given my current circumstances. The GPS was still functioning, though, and according to the satellite data, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, following a legitimate hiking trail through state forest land. But legitimate trails didn't behave like this. I was standing at the edge of something unnatural, something intentionally altered. 71:48. The sixth tree fell as I stood there, staring at my phone. This time, I felt something else, something that made my blood run cold. A vibration in the ground beneath my feet. It was subtle, but unmistakable. It started just before the crack of splitting wood, a gentle tremor that seemed to travel along the length of the riverbed, like a signal running through some vast underground nervous system. I knelt and pressed my palm against the exposed stone, hoping to steady myself, and there it was again, a rhythmic pulsing. It was as if something massive was moving through the earth below, sending waves through the ground that I could feel in my bones. 72:14. The logical part of my mind immediately leaped to explanations. Underground streams, tectonic activity, maybe even old mining operations that had left the substrate unstable. But logic was becoming an increasingly fragile anchor. As tree after tree continued to fall with that same impossible precision, I realized the truth: this wasn't nature at work. It wasn't even a random event. Each collapse seemed designed not just to block my path, but to guide it, forcing me deeper into the forest, away from anything resembling civilization. 72:34. I tried calling out, shouting, "Hello," into the gathering darkness. But my voice seemed to die just a few feet from my mouth, swallowed by the oppressive silence that had settled over everything like a burial shroud. The absence of echo was particularly disturbing. Sound should bounce off these high riverbank walls, but instead, it simply vanished. It was as if the air itself was consuming my words, holding them captive in a world where nothing could escape. 73:07. The seventh tree fell directly in front of me, close enough that I felt the rush of displaced air across my face. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rocky ground. And that's when I saw them, the cuts where each tree had fallen. The stumps showed the same impossibly clean severance. No splintering. No tears. No jagged breaks that would indicate a natural fall. They had been severed with surgical precision, as though they were sliced by some enormous, invisible blade. 73:45. The marks were not from high winds or structural failure. Just smooth, precise cuts that looked almost surgical in their perfection. But there were no saw marks, no tool signatures, nothing to explain how such massive trunks had been severed so cleanly. It was as if they had been sliced by something invisible, something that moved through solid wood like a hot knife through butter. My breathing was coming in short, sharp gasps now, and I realized I was on the edge of full panic. My heart was pounding, my thoughts racing, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was nothing. The unnatural precision of the cuts, the eerie quiet, the falling trees, it was all too much. 74:16. I forced myself to stop, to take deeper breaths, to try and think rationally about what I was experiencing. There had to be an explanation. Something I was missing, some obvious cause that fear was preventing me from seeing clearly. I couldn't let myself be overwhelmed by terror. I had to stay calm. But as I stood there, trying to regain my composure, the eighth tree fell. And with it came the sound I had been unconsciously dreading, the hollow thump from beneath the ground. It was like footsteps in an enormous underground chamber, a sound so deep and resonant that it vibrated through the earth. 74:34. The vibration was stronger now, rhythmic and purposeful, traveling along the riverbed in waves that I could feel through the soles of my boots. Whatever was down there, it was moving, and it was big. The pattern of the tremor suggested something vast, something deliberate, something that knew exactly where I was and was actively working to control my movements. The earth itself seemed to respond to this force, creating a path that I was being forced to follow. 75:04. I thought about the old stories, the ones my grandfather used to tell about things that lived beneath the mountains. Creatures older than human memory, sleeping in the deep places until something, or someone, disturbed their rest. I had always dismissed such tales as folklore, the kind of myth-making that emerged naturally from isolated communities trying to explain the inexplicable. But standing here, in this increasingly alien landscape, those stories didn't seem quite so fantastical anymore. 75:19. The ninth tree fell as I started moving again, and this time, I was certain. Whatever force was controlling these events wasn't just manipulating the trees. It was manipulating me, guiding me deeper into the heart of something ancient and monstrous. 75:38. I saw something, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. Something large and dark, a shape so brief and swift that it vanished the moment I turned to look directly at it. The shadows between the standing trees seemed deeper now, more solid somehow, as if they possessed a weight and substance that ordinary darkness lacked. My pulse quickened, and my breath grew shallow. I was running now, no longer pretending this was a casual hike gone slightly wrong. The fallen trees formed an obstacle course that forced me to climb and scramble, always pushing me further from the main trail, deeper into sections of forest that felt increasingly untamed. 75:49. My rational mind kept insisting that I was experiencing some kind of psychological break, that stress and isolation were causing me to interpret natural phenomena in supernatural terms. But that explanation was becoming harder to maintain as the evidence mounted around me. The forest was no longer behaving as it should, and my body could feel it, the pulse of something else moving, something alive beneath the earth. 76:07. The 10th tree fell just as I reached a bend in the riverbed, and with its crash came a new sound. A low rumbling moan that seemed to rise from the earth itself. It was too deep to be human, too organic to be geological, and it reverberated through my chest cavity like the call of some enormous whale surfacing from profound depths. I pressed myself against the riverbank wall, my back against the cold stone, trying to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of what was happening. But the sound, the moan, the rumble, was too much. It was too alive. 76:25. The fallen trees formed a perfect funnel now, channeling me toward whatever lay around that bend. There was no going back. Even if I could somehow climb over the massive trunks blocking my retreat, I was no longer certain I could find my way out of this maze of toppled giants. The forest was trapping me, pushing me forward into something I couldn't see but could feel closing in. 76:45. The underground movement was constant now, a steady progression that seemed to pace my own movements. Whatever was down there, it was tracking me, anticipating my path, preparing something ahead of my position. The hollow thumping had developed a rhythm, a disturbing consistency, that reminded me uncomfortably of a heartbeat, or perhaps breathing. The slow inhalation and exhalation of something vast, beyond human comprehension. 77:12. I rounded the bend and stopped dead. The riverbed opened into a clearing. But it wasn't just any clearing. The ground here was disturbed, scarred, as if something large and heavy had moved through it, leaving its mark. There was a massive hole in the earth, a gaping chasm that seemed to pulse with a strange, rhythmic energy. And at the center of it all, there was something. Something that I could feel but not see, a presence that hung in the air like a thick fog, too real to deny but too alien to understand. 77:44. I stumbled into a natural amphitheater, its walls rising on all sides to create a perfect circular chamber, perhaps 100 yards across. The canopy overhead had grown so thick that virtually no sunlight penetrated to the floor, leaving everything bathed in a green-tinged twilight that pulsed with its own subtle luminescence. The air was thick, alive with an unnatural stillness that set my nerves on edge. But it wasn't the geological formation that made me freeze in terror. It was what had been done to it. 77:58. Every tree surrounding the amphitheater had been felled with the same surgical precision I'd witnessed throughout my journey. They lay in perfect radial lines, their trunks pointing inward toward the center of the circle like the spokes of some enormous wheel. The pattern was too precise, too deliberate to be anything but intentional, a design created by intelligence, not chance. And in the very center of this wooden mandala, the ground had begun to bulge upward. The earth was moving, rising in a perfect dome perhaps 20 feet across, as if something massive was pushing up from below. The soil cracked and shifted with each pulse of that underground heartbeat, revealing glimpses of something dark and organic beneath. 78:11. It wasn't rock or root that I saw. It was something that breathed. Something that pulsed with a life force so ancient it predated human existence by countless eons. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn and flee, but there was nowhere to go. The fallen trees formed an impenetrable barrier around the amphitheater's perimeter, their arrangement ensuring that anyone who entered this space would be trapped, unable to escape until whatever lay beneath chose to reveal itself. 78:26. The design was perfect. A trap constructed with the patience and precision of something that thought in geological timescales. A trap for the unwitting, me, and possibly for countless others who had come before me, drawn into this dark, ancient snare. 78:44. The mound in the center rose higher, and I began to hear something new, a sound like vast lungs filling with air. The breathing was so large, so profound, that each inhalation lasted minutes rather than seconds. The dome of earth cracked once again, the sound like the groan of a waking giant. 79:40. The dome opened at its peak, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to absorb what little light remained in the amphitheater. From that darkness, something began to emerge. I never saw it clearly. My mind seemed to refuse to process what my eyes were showing me, protecting my sanity by blurring the details into an impression of vast movement and alien geometry. But I felt its attention turned toward me, felt the weight of an intelligence so ancient and vast that human consciousness was barely a flicker in its peripheral vision. 79:52. The trees had been falling all day, not to trap me, but to guide me here. To deliver me to this thing that dwelt beneath the mountains. This entity that had been waiting with the patience of stone for someone to stumble into its domain. The underground movement hadn't been random. It had been preparation, clearing pathways, arranging the stage for this moment of contact. 80:05. I stood there, in that twilight amphitheater, surrounded by the precisely arranged corpses of ancient trees, and felt something fundamental in my understanding of reality begin to crack and shift. Whatever emerged from that hole in the earth wasn't bound by the rules that governed the world I thought I knew. It existed in spaces between spaces, in the hollow places beneath the familiar surface of things. It was beyond the realm of human understanding, beyond time itself, a presence that didn't belong to the physical world but had quietly watched over it for eons. 80:22. As consciousness finally began to fracture under the weight of what I was witnessing, one last thought managed to surface before darkness claimed me. I had been walking these mountains for 15 years, following the same trails, visiting the same familiar places. But this amphitheater, this perfect circular chamber with its radial arrangement of fallen giants, I had never seen it before. Which meant either it had never existed until today, or I had never truly been hiking where I thought I was hiking at all. 81:19. The last thought faded into oblivion, swallowed by the darkness. The boundaries between reality and something far older, far darker, had been breached. 81:31. The last thing I remember is the sound of something vast and patient settling back beneath the earth. It was as though it had completed its purpose, content now that it had made contact, confident that I would carry its presence with me back into the world above. Assuming, of course, that I ever found my way back at all. Story 5. 82:08. The fluorescent lights above the gas station hummed with that particular frequency that gets under your skin, a sound like insects trapped in glass. It was 3:17 a.m. when he walked in, and I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock on the register, counting down the hours until my shift ended. The bell above the door gave its tired chime, and cold October air rushed in with him. He looked like he'd been driving for days. His jacket, a faded brown leather thing, was stained dark around the collar and sleeves with what I assumed was motor oil. His hair hung limp and greasy, framing a face that seemed carved from something harder than flesh. But it was his eyes that made me uncomfortable. They weren't looking at anything in particular. They were just staring through the space where I stood behind the counter. 82:38. The smell hit me next, gasoline, yes, but underneath that, something else. Something organic and sour, like meat left too long in the sun. He approached the counter without browsing the shelves, without the usual hesitation of someone deciding between energy drinks or candy bars. His boots made no sound on the linoleum floor, which should have been impossible given the way his heels struck the ground. I found myself straining to hear his footsteps, as if the absence of sound was more disturbing than any noise could have been. 83:09. Need a lighter, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the casual pleasantries that even the rudest customers usually managed at this hour. No, excuse me, or, hey there, just the statement, delivered like he was reading from a script. I reached for the display case behind me, my hand trembling slightly as I selected a basic blue Bic lighter. When I turned back, he was standing closer to the counter than before. I hadn't heard him move. 84:04. The transaction was wordless. He placed exact change on the counter, 4 quarters, 2 dimes, and 3 pennies, and took the lighter. Our fingers didn't touch, but I felt something like static electricity jump between us. The fluorescent lights flickered once, casting strange shadows across his face that made his features seem to shift and blur. He left as quietly as he'd entered, and I watched through the window as he walked to a dark sedan parked at the far edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the overhead lights. The car's license plate was obscured by mud, and something about its shape seemed wrong, as if it were slightly too long or too low to the ground. He got in and drove away without turning on his headlights. 84:22. I told myself it was just another weird customer working the night shift at a rural gas station. You see all kinds. But something about the encounter left me unsettled. I found myself checking the locks on the doors repeatedly, and every time a car passed on the highway, I tensed, expecting to see that dark sedan returning. 84:39. The next few days passed without incident, and I began to forget about the man with the empty eyes. It wasn't until Thursday evening, while eating dinner and half watching the local news, that everything changed. The anchor's voice seemed to fade into background noise as the photograph filled the screen. 84:56. It was him, the same gaunt face, the same lifeless stare. But now, I was seeing him in daylight, in a police mugshot that made his features appear even more hollow and predatory. Suspected of multiple abductions across 3 states, the anchor was saying. Harold Vance was last seen in the area early Tuesday morning, driving a dark blue sedan. Police consider him extremely dangerous and advise residents not to approach. 85:09. Tuesday morning. Early Tuesday morning, I had worked Monday night into Tuesday morning. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. He had been in the gas station at exactly the time the police were now marking as his last known location. I hadn't made the connection before, but the details flooded my mind now, his unblinking stare, the way he had moved, the unsettling silence he carried with him. The remote control slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in my small apartment, and for a moment, I was convinced someone would respond to it. 86:11. Footsteps in the hallway. A knock at the door. But there was only silence, heavy and expectant. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Lots of people had dark hair and hollow cheeks. The lighting in the gas station was terrible, casting strange shadows that could make anyone look sinister. But deep down, I knew the man who had asked for a lighter, who had stood in my store and placed exact change on my counter, was a killer. Sleep became elusive. Every night, I lay in bed, replaying the encounter, searching for details I might have missed. Had he seemed agitated, nervous? Had there been blood on his jacket, not oil? The more I thought about it, the more the memory seemed to shift and change, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. 86:28. I started noticing things, small things that might have been coincidence but felt like something more. The same dark sedan parked across from my apartment building when I left for work. A figure standing at the edge of the gas station lot during my shifts, just beyond the reach of the lights. The smell of gasoline and something rotten whenever I walked alone at night. 87:05. My manager, Ron, noticed my deteriorating state. He was a good man, worked days, and always made sure the night shift crew felt supported. When he asked if everything was okay, I almost told him, almost. But how do you explain that you're being watched by a killer you once sold a lighter to? How do you make someone understand that you can feel eyes on you, even when you're alone? Instead, I mumbled something about insomnia and stress. Ron suggested I take a few days off, but the thought of being alone in my apartment for that long filled me with dread. At least at work, there were people passing through, the illusion of safety in numbers. 87:44. It was during my shift the following Monday that I found the first note. I was restocking the cigarette display when I noticed it, tucked between 2 packs of cigarettes. At first, I thought it was a scrap of paper or some discarded receipt, but as I pulled it out, I saw the words written in neat, dark ink. I'm always watching. You will remember me. 88:12. 2 cartons of Marlboro, a small piece of paper folded precisely in half. My name was written on the outside in block letters. Mike. Inside, in the same careful handwriting, you remember me. My hand shook as I read it, and I looked around the store as if the writer might still be there, watching from behind the snack aisle. But I was alone. Had been alone for over an hour. The security cameras would show me that no one had come in since my last customer, a tired trucker who'd bought coffee and beef jerky. 88:31. I told myself it was a prank, maybe one of the day shift guys messing with me, though none of them seemed the type. I threw the note away and tried to focus on my duties, but every few minutes, I found myself glancing at the trash can, half expecting the paper to have crawled back out. 89:03. The second note appeared 2 days later, slipped under the windshield wiper of my car. This one was longer. You saw my face. You know what I am. But you didn't tell. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after finding it, engine running, doors locked, scanning the parking lot for any sign of movement. The security lights created pools of yellow illumination, separated by areas of impenetrable darkness. Anyone could have been hiding in those shadows, watching me read his words. 89:22. That night, I called the police. The officer who took my report was polite but skeptical. What crime had been committed? Someone leaving notes wasn't illegal unless they were threatening, and these weren't exactly threats. They were questions. The officer suggested I install security cameras, maybe stay with a friend for a few days. But I didn't have friends, not really. The night shift job had isolated me from most social connections, and my family lived 3 states away. I was alone with whatever was happening to me. 89:55. The third note was waiting on my pillow when I got home from work that night. 90:13. When I got home from work, my hands went numb as I stared at it, trying to process the impossibility of its presence. I had locked my apartment. I always locked my apartment. The deadbolt was still engaged when I turned my key, and the windows were sealed shut, painted over years ago by a landlord too cheap to maintain them properly. Yet there it was, placed with surgical precision in the center of my pillow, as if someone had measured to ensure perfect placement. "You're starting to understand it," it read. "The space between what's real and what isn't. I live there now. So do you." 90:32. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I sat in my living room chair with a baseball bat across my knees, watching the door and listening for sounds that never came. My reflection in the dark window looked haggard, almost unrecognizable. The fluorescent lights at work seemed to follow me home, that same insectal humming filling my apartment, even though I knew it was impossible. 91:04. By Friday, I was beginning to question my own sanity. The rational part of my mind suggested explanations: stress-induced hallucinations, a breakdown brought on by isolation and fear. Maybe I was writing the notes myself in some fugue state I couldn't remember. Maybe Harold Vance had never existed at all, was just a composite of fears given form by an exhausted brain. But then I found the lighter. 91:23. It was sitting on my kitchen counter Saturday morning, the same blue Bic I had sold to him nearly 2 weeks earlier. I knew it was the same one because of a small scratch along the side, a mark I'd noticed when I'd pulled it from the display case. The lighter was warm to the touch, as if someone had been using it recently. When I flicked the wheel, it produced a flame. But the fire burned the wrong color, too cold, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. 91:42. I set it down carefully, as if it might still burn me. 92:14. It might explode, and I backed away. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing inward with each breath I took. The humming sound was back, louder now, emanating not from any light fixture, but from the lighter itself. That's when I realized the truth, or what felt like truth in that moment of crystalline terror. Harold Vance hadn't left notes or broken into my apartment. He hadn't been following me or watching from the shadows. The killer was gone. Had probably been arrested or moved on to other hunting grounds days ago. 92:32. But something else had taken notice of our brief encounter. Something that lived in the spaces between certainty and doubt, between sleeping and waking. Something that fed on the fear of recognition, the horror of knowing you had stood face to face with evil and done nothing to stop it. The lighter sat on my counter, burning without being lit, casting impossible shadows on the walls. And in those shadows, I could see the outline of a man, who wasn't quite there, whose empty eyes watched me with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. 92:45. I understand now why he needed the lighter, not to light cigarettes or start fires, but to mark the moment when our paths crossed. To create a connection that would outlast his physical presence. The flame was a beacon, calling to whatever comes after, whatever feeds on the guilt and terror of witnesses who remain silent. 93:14. The news report stopped mentioning Harold Vance after a week. No new abductions, no sightings. It was as if he had simply vanished from the world, leaving only questions and the lingering smell of gasoline and decay. But the lighter remains burning, its cold fire on my kitchen counter. And sometimes, in the small hours of the morning, when the fluorescent humming is loudest, I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, a figure standing just outside the range of certainty, waiting with infinite patience for me to finally acknowledge what I know to be true. 94:02. I sold a killer a lighter, and now, in the dark corners of my life, I am haunted by a presence that exists between the spaces of certainty and doubt, a darkness that will never truly leave. 94:21. The space between what is real and what cannot be real. Something has come to collect the debt. The flame burns on, casting shadows that shouldn't exist, and I find myself wondering, when the lighter finally runs out of fuel, what will happen to the darkness it has been holding back? 94:38. I suppose I'll find out soon enough. The flame grows smaller each day, and the shadows grow longer. Somewhere, in the space between waking and sleeping, between sanity and madness, Harold Vance's empty eyes continue to watch, waiting for the moment when the light finally dies, and the real darkness can begin. Story 6. 95:01. The neon sign buzzed with electric persistence, casting its orange glow across the empty parking lot like a beacon for the desperate and the sleepless. Brew and go 24 hours it promised. Though at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, I seemed to be the only one taking it up on that offer. My headlights swept across the storefront as I pulled into a spot directly in front of the main entrance, the beams revealing floor-to-ceiling windows that glowed warmly from within. Everything looked normal from the outside. Too normal, maybe. 95:15. I sat in my car for a moment, engine still running, letting the familiar hum of the heater wash over me. The drive from Denver had been longer than expected, and caffeine wasn't just a want anymore. It was a biological necessity if I planned to make it to Salt Lake City before sunrise. My eyelids felt like sandpaper, and that dangerous microsleep had started creeping in during the last 30 miles. 95:28. The coffee shop's interior blazed with fluorescent life. I could see the familiar layout through the windows, the curved counter, the menu board suspended from the ceiling, the neat rows of merchandise lining the walls. Steam rose from what must have been the espresso machine, and I caught the subtle flicker of heat shimmer from the warming ovens. The place was clearly operational, humming with all the mechanical heartbeats of a functioning business. But something felt off. 96:27. There wasn't a single person visible anywhere inside. I turned off the engine and stepped into the cold Wyoming air. The silence hit me immediately, not just the absence of traffic or voices, but something deeper. Even the usual night sound seemed muffled, as if the darkness itself were holding its breath. My footsteps on the asphalt sounded unnaturally loud, each step echoing off the empty buildings that lined this stretch of highway. The entrance doors were the automatic kind, and they slid open with a mechanical whisper as I approached. A wave of warm air rushed out to meet me, carrying the rich scent of roasted coffee beans and something else, something sweeter, almost medicinal. 96:42. The familiar chime announced my arrival to no one. I stepped inside and waited, the overhead speakers playing some generic acoustic guitar melody at low volume, the kind of background music designed to be barely noticed. The registers sat silent and dark, their screens reflecting the fluorescent lights in fractured patterns. Behind the counter, the espresso machine continued its quiet work, occasionally releasing small puffs of steam like mechanical sighs. 97:14. Hello. I called out. My voice felt strange in the empty space. The words seemed to get absorbed by the walls, leaving no echo, no response. I walked deeper into the store, my sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floors. The merchandise displays stood in perfect order, bags of coffee beans arranged by roast level, travel mugs sorted by size, packages of pastries lined up behind glass doors. 97:28. Everything was precisely where it should be, as if someone had just finished organizing it all. The warming ovens hummed behind the counter, their digital displays showing optimal temperatures. Fresh baked goods sat under heat lamps, looking like they'd been placed there within the hour, banana bread, croissants, breakfast sandwiches wrapped in paper, all waiting for customers who weren't there. 98:05. I approached the counter, my hands already reaching for the edge, an almost instinctual movement. But then I stopped, a chill creeping down my spine. Something about the place, the stillness, the perfect order, was wrong. The air felt too heavy, the silence too complete. 98:36. I reached for my wallet out of habit. That's when I noticed the order display screen mounted on the wall behind the registers. It was one of those digital boards that showed pending orders, usually displaying things like large latte, Sarah, or medium dark roast, Mike, but this screen showed something else entirely. In clean white letters against a black background, it read, large black coffee, Marcus Hoffman. My full name. My exact coffee preference. I stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I hadn't even touched the ordering kiosk that stood to my left, its screen still showing the main menu in all its colorful, untouched glory. 99:13. I pulled out my phone to check if maybe I'd somehow placed a mobile order and forgotten about it. The screen showed no recent app activity, no order confirmations in my email, nothing. The display board flickered once, the letters scrambling for just a moment before reforming. Large black coffee, Marcus Hoffman. 99:25. Is someone back there? I called louder this time, leaning slightly over the counter to peer into the prep area. I could see the industrial coffee makers, their glass carafes full and steaming, the cream dispensers, the syrup pumps, the cash registers, all waiting. But no people. 99:44. A soft mechanical whir drew my attention to my left. The ordering kiosk screen had changed. Instead of the main menu, it now displayed a simple message: "Thank you for your order, Marcus. Please wait while we prepare your beverage." I definitely hadn't touched it. 100:01. My hand trembled slightly as I reached toward the screen. The moment my finger made contact with the glass, it went dark for several seconds, then flashed back to life, showing the main menu again as if nothing had happened. 100:17. The coffee smell was getting stronger now, tinged with that sweet, almost chemical undertone I'd noticed when I first walked in. It reminded me of something medical, like the disinfectant they used in hospitals, but warmer, more organic. Behind the counter, I heard the faint sound of something moving, a soft shuffle of footsteps or a faint clink of glass, but there was no one in sight. 100:50. I heard the distinct sound of a coffee cup being placed on a surface, then another. The soft clink of ceramic against metal. I couldn't see anyone, but someone was definitely working back there. 101:05. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying a slight tremor now. "I can hear you. Could you please come out? I just want to order a coffee." The sound stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, expectant, like the pause before thunder. I waited, counting heartbeats. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with their characteristic electrical whine. The espresso machine released another small cloud of steam. The acoustic guitar in the speakers completed its melody and started over from the beginning. 101:24. Then, from somewhere in the back prep area, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. The sound of someone walking across a hard floor in soft-soled shoes. But still, no one appeared. The footsteps stopped, and I heard what sounded like liquid being poured, the rich glug of coffee hitting the bottom of a cup, then the pitch changing as the cup filled. It was a sound I'd heard thousands of times, but here, in this empty place, it took on an ominous quality. 101:39. "Large black coffee for Marcus," a voice called from the back. The voice was perfectly normal, friendly, professional, neither male nor female. The kind of voice you'd expect from any coffee shop employee anywhere in America. Except I still couldn't see who had spoken. 102:13. A cup appeared on the pickup counter. Just appeared. One moment, the surface was empty, the next moment, there was a large coffee cup sitting there, steam rising from the small opening in its plastic lid. I approached slowly, my heart rate climbing with each step. The cup was exactly what I'd ordered. What I'd somehow ordered without actually ordering anything. Large black coffee in a standard to-go cup with the Brew and Go logo printed on the side. 102:27. As I reached for it, I noticed something else on the counter beside the cup, a receipt. I picked it up with shaking fingers. The thermal paper was still warm from printing. At the top, it showed the standard receipt header, store location, date, time. The time stamp read 3:24 a.m. 103:10. Exactly the right time. Below that, the itemized order, large black coffee, $2.49. At the bottom, in the space usually reserved for the cashier's name, it simply said, "Served by recognition." Not Rebecca or Robert or any normal name. Recognition. 103:30. I looked up at the security cameras mounted in the corners of the ceiling. Their little red lights blinked steadily, recording everything. But recording what exactly? A man standing alone in an empty coffee shop, talking to no one, picking up a cup that had materialized out of thin air. The thought hit me like ice water: what if I was the only one who couldn't see the employees? What if they were standing right there, looking at me with concern, wondering why I seemed so confused and frightened? What if the problem wasn't with the store but with me? 103:48. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app, holding it up to film the area behind the counter. Through the screen, I could see everything exactly as my eyes saw it: empty prep stations, unmanned equipment, no people anywhere. But as I watched, something moved in the reflection on the espresso machine's chrome surface, a dark shape, human-sized, moving from left to right behind where I was standing. 104:06. I spun around. Nothing. The store stretched out behind me, empty and unchanged. When I looked back at my phone screen, the reflection was gone. 104:19. I set the device down and picked up the coffee cup with both hands. It was hot, almost too hot to hold, and the coffee inside smelled perfect, rich and dark and exactly the way I liked it. I lifted the cup to my lips and took a careful sip. It was good. Really good. Better than most coffee I'd had from places with actual visible staff. The warmth spread through my chest, and for a moment, the strangeness of the situation seemed to recede. Maybe this was just some new automated system I wasn't familiar with. Maybe the employees were in a back room, monitoring everything through cameras, operating the machinery remotely. Maybe this was the future of fast food: invisible, efficient, impersonal. 105:29. But then I noticed the receipt in my hand was changing. The text remained the same, but below the original printing, new words were appearing, not printed, but written in what looked like pencil. The letters were forming themselves as I watched. "Thank you for visiting us, Marcus. We've been waiting for you." The pencil writing continued line by line, as if an invisible hand were writing directly on the paper. "You're tired. You've been driving for a long time. You need rest." My hands were shaking now, making the receipt flutter. "There's a room upstairs. Clean sheets. No charge. You can continue your journey tomorrow." The writing stopped. I looked around the coffee shop again, searching for any sign of stairs, any indication that there was an upstairs at all. The ceiling looked standard, drop tiles with fluorescent fixtures. No indication of another floor above. But when I looked more carefully at the back wall, past the counter and prep areas, I could see what might have been a door. It was partially hidden behind a rack of promotional materials, but there was definitely something there. 106:05. The coffee cup in my hands was getting uncomfortably hot. When I tried to set it down on the nearest table, I found that it seemed stuck to my palms. Not physically stuck, but every time I attempted to release it, my fingers wouldn't respond, like my nervous system had decided that letting go simply wasn't an option. The receipt was still in my other hand, and more writing was appearing. "Don't be afraid, Marcus. We know what you need. We've always known." 106:23. The fluorescent lights overhead began to flicker, just slightly. Not enough to plunge the place into darkness, but enough to create a strobe effect that made everything seem to move when it shouldn't. The merchandise displays appeared to shift and sway. The menu boards swayed on their chains. "We've been preparing for your arrival." I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if I were trying to move through deep water. The coffee smell was overwhelming now, mixed with that sweet, chemical scent that seemed to be getting stronger by the minute. It was making me dizzy. "You can't leave yet, Marcus. You haven't finished." 107:43. "Your coffee." I looked down at the cup in my hands. It was still full, despite the fact that I was sure I'd taken several sips. The surface of the coffee was perfectly still, reflecting the flickering lights like a dark mirror. In that reflection, I saw my own face looking back up at me, but something was wrong with it. My eyes in the reflection were completely black, as if the pupils had expanded to fill the entire socket. And I was smiling, a smile I definitely wasn't making. I jerked the cup away from my face, and the coffee sloshed violently inside. 108:01. When I looked again, it was just coffee. No reflection. No black eyes. No smile. The receipt was still writing itself. "You're so tired, Marcus. You've been driving for days, weeks. Do you even remember when you started this trip?" 108:19. I tried to think. I'd left Denver, when? This morning? Yesterday morning? The timeline felt slippery in my mind, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. You've been driving in circles. The same highway, the same exits, the same destinations that never arrive. Don't you recognize this place? I looked around the coffee shop again, trying to focus through the growing dizziness. The layout, the color scheme, the arrangement of tables and chairs, it all seemed familiar, but not familiar like a chain restaurant where every location looks the same. 108:59. Familiar, like a specific place I'd been before. You've stopped here before, Marcus. Many times. Always at 3:17 a.m. Always ordering the same thing. Always asking the same questions. The cup was burning my hands now, but I still couldn't seem to let go of it. The coffee inside had started to bubble slightly, as if it were boiling. 109:17. Always ending up in the same room upstairs. I forced myself to look toward the back wall again. The door I'd glimpsed earlier was clearly visible now, painted the same color as the walls, but definitely there. It was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see wooden stairs leading up into darkness. You never remember checking out, do you, Marcus? You never remember leaving. You just wake up in your car, in the parking lot at 3:17 a.m., needing coffee. 109:36. The receipt was almost completely covered in writing now. The original transaction details nearly obscured by the penciled words that continued to appear. But you always come back inside. You always order the same thing. You always end up in the same room. 109:54. The fluorescent lights flickered again. 110:25. More intensely, and in the strobing illumination, I caught glimpses of movement throughout the store, shadows that shouldn't exist, shapes that were there one moment and gone the next. Behind the counter, in the corners, reflected in the windows, always just at the edge of vision, always just out of focus. The room is ready for you, Marcus. It's always ready. 110:42. I tried to drop the cup. Tried to throw it. Tried to crush it in my hands. Nothing worked. It remained perfectly intact, perfectly hot, perfectly stuck to my palms. The coffee inside continued to bubble, sending up streams of vapor that smelled less and less like coffee and more like that sweet, chemical scent. You can fight it if you want. You always do. But you always end up going upstairs. 111:02. My vision was starting to blur around the edges. The store seemed to be slowly rotating around me, or maybe I was rotating and everything else was standing still. The distinction no longer seemed important because deep down, you know the truth, don't you, Marcus? I could hear footsteps again, but this time they seemed to be coming from all directions, the soft sound of shoes on hard floors, getting closer and closer, though I still couldn't see anyone. You've been here for a very long time. 111:33. The receipt in my hand was completely black now, covered in layer upon layer of writing that spiraled from the edges toward the center. The words were getting smaller and smaller, cramming themselves into the remaining white space. And you're never going to leave. The door at the back of the store swung open with a long, slow creak. The stairs beyond were no longer dark. They were lit by the same fluorescent glow as the rest of the store, ascending into what looked like an ordinary hallway. 112:06. I found myself walking toward it, not by choice, but not against my will either. It was more like remembering to do something I'd always intended to do, like coming home after a long trip. The coffee cup came with me, still burning my hands, still impossible to release. With each step, the store around me seemed to fade slightly, becoming less solid, less real. 112:20. By the time I reached the door, I could barely feel the floor beneath my feet. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing in the enclosed space. At the top, a hallway stretched out in both directions. 112:55. The directions lined with doors, all the doors were closed except one, about halfway down on the left. Room 237. The number meant nothing to me, but seeing it filled me with a sense of coming home that was both comforting and terrifying. The door was open just wide enough for me to see inside, a bed with white sheets turned down and waiting, a window that looked out onto the parking lot below, where my car sat under the neon sign, where my car had always sat. 113:17. I walked to the window and looked down. In the driver's seat, I could see a figure slumped forward against the steering wheel. Male. Wearing the same clothes I was wearing. Dark hair. Same build. The same face, visible in profile in the orange glow of the neon sign. The coffee cup finally released from my hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud. When I looked down, it was empty, though I couldn't remember drinking from it. 113:36. On the bed, someone had left a fresh receipt. This one was handwritten from the start in the same pencil marks I'd seen downstairs. Welcome back, Marcus. Sleep well. Your car will be ready for you at 3:17 a.m. 113:55. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body moving without conscious direction. The sheets were cool and soft, exactly the way I preferred them. Outside the window, the neon sign continued its electric buzz, casting the same orange glow across the same empty parking lot. The figure in my car hadn't moved. I lay back against the pillows and closed my eyes. The sweet chemical smell was fainter up here, replaced by something cleaner, laundry detergent and fresh air. As sleep began to pull me under, I heard the faint sound of an engine starting in the parking lot below, then the crunch of tires on gravel, growing fainter as the vehicle pulled back onto the highway, heading towards Salt Lake City maybe, or Denver, or anywhere else. 114:13. That was always just a little too far away. The last thing I heard before sleep claimed me completely was the familiar ding of the coffee shop's entrance door opening downstairs, followed by footsteps on the polished floor. And then, from 112:55. The directions lined with doors, all the doors were closed except one, about halfway down on the left. Room 237. The number meant nothing to me, but seeing it filled me with a sense of coming home that was both comforting and terrifying. The door was open just wide enough for me to see inside, a bed with white sheets turned down and waiting, a window that looked out onto the parking lot below, where my car sat under the neon sign, where my car had always sat. 113:17. I walked to the window and looked down. In the driver's seat, I could see a figure slumped forward against the steering wheel. Male. Wearing the same clothes I was wearing. Dark hair. Same build. The same face, visible in profile in the orange glow of the neon sign. The coffee cup finally released from my hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud. When I looked down, it was empty, though I couldn't remember drinking from it. 113:36. On the bed, someone had left a fresh receipt. This one was handwritten from the start in the same pencil marks I'd seen downstairs. Welcome back, Marcus. Sleep well. Your car will be ready for you at 3:17 a.m. 113:55. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body moving without conscious direction. The sheets were cool and soft, exactly the way I preferred them. Outside the window, the neon sign continued its electric buzz, casting the same orange glow across the same empty parking lot. The figure in my car hadn't moved. I lay back against the pillows and closed my eyes. The sweet chemical smell was fainter up here, replaced by something cleaner, laundry detergent and fresh air. As sleep began to pull me under, I heard the faint sound of an engine starting in the parking lot below, then the crunch of tires on gravel, growing fainter as the vehicle pulled back onto the highway, heading towards Salt Lake City maybe, or Denver, or anywhere else. 114:13. That was always just a little too far away. The last thing I heard before sleep claimed me completely was the familiar ding of the coffee shop's entrance door opening downstairs, followed by footsteps on the polished floor. And then, from